Jon Snow stood upon the frosted ramparts of Castle Black, the wind knifing through his hair in unrelenting gusts. The wall loomed around him, ancient ice shimmering under a pallid moon. Few men in the Night's Watch lingered on the heights at such an hour, but Jon was not like most men. The winds had always called to him, carried secrets to his ears, the howling of direwolves, the distant moan of creatures beyond the wall, the unspoken words of those dead and gone. On this night, though, something more pressing weighed on him than the cold or the mysteries of the far north. A hush blanketed the castle below. Strange dreams had been haunting Jon, dreams of fire and swords, of great beasts and 1,000 blades. He tried to shake off the lingering sense of dread, for dread it was. He'd felt its coils tightening around his heart since his confrontation with the mutineers at Craster's Keep. Even after retaking the stronghold, he could not banish the feeling that a new doom approached. The wall had always been a place for nightmares, but his own nightmares felt entwined with something far bigger and older than himself. The stories whispered in half-forgotten corners of the 7 kingdoms spoke of legends rising and the dead walking. Rumors made all the more alive by the whites and white walkers he had seen with his own eyes. Below him, in the courtyard, torches flickered and spat embers into the cold air. Night's Watch brothers moved about like wraiths, finishing their duties. He could pick out Ed Tollett's stoop, the sturdy stance of a few other brothers who were still loyal and alive. Alive, he thought grimly. So many had been lost. He sighed, letting the frosty air fill his lungs, clearing his head. He had no desire for more war, more death. But he knew war would come whether they desired it or not. Night was falling on the realm, and only the blind would fail to see it. He turned from the battlements at last, retreating down the winding steps into the yard. The rime of ice on the steps nearly claimed him, but he held the railing with a firm grasp. One of the men with a torch stepped aside to let him pass, giving him a respectful nod. Despite his youth, he carried the authority of a Lord Commander, though he had never wanted that burden. Such was the shape of his life, shaped and molded by oaths and promises, many forced upon him by the tides of war and duty. But here he was, and the men needed him. He squared his shoulders. Outside the gates, he could sense the vastness of the north, the forest of haunted pines, the rivers locked in ice, and all that waited beyond. As Jon entered the warmth of the main hall, he paused when he saw Melisandre by the fire. The Red Priestess turned her head slightly, the flames painting her hair an even more vivid shade of crimson. Her red robes coiled around her like living embers, and her eyes caught his eyes that seemed ancient, wise, and brimming with dangerous certainties. He felt a flicker of unease, recalling how she followed him with her gaze, a measuring stare, and the murmured name she had repeated on more than one occasion. Azor Ahai. He wanted no part of this prophecy of hers. He had enough troubles without being declared a chosen champion. Davos Seaworth stood off to the side, brow furrowed in quiet disapproval. The Onion Knight had little love for the powers of the Lord of Light, but he carried his own sense of duty and loyalty, not least to Stannis Baratheon, who, Jon reminded himself, still resided in the shadow of the wall, pressing his claim to the Iron Throne. Even so, it was not Stannis who preoccupied Melisandre now. If the rumor was true, it was Jon. He made to step aside, to slip past her unnoticed, but Melisandre caught his movement, her arm extending gracefully. "Lord Commander," she said, the title rolling off her tongue with strange reverence. "Will you not warm yourself by the fire? The night is cold, and cold is an enemy we cannot underestimate." Jon hesitated. The common room was empty except for the 3 of them. "I'm fine," he replied. "The cold keeps me awake." But even as he spoke, he couldn't deny the snug glow of the flames was tempting. He decided to indulge her briefly and approached the fire. "I've seen great cold in my visions," Melisandre said, folding her hands before her. The spark of the flames danced in her eyes. "I've seen a storm, a darkness that sweeps over all that lives. Out of that darkness must come a champion of light, or the realm is doomed." She tilted her chin, her gaze lingering on Jon's face. "You have seen what lies beyond the wall." You know what is at stake. Jon did not disagree with that. I know we face something that has not been seen for thousands of years. The White Walkers aren't a myth, and an army of the dead marches behind them. The Seven Kingdoms might not believe it, but that will not stop them from coming. Yet you do not believe in R'hllor's champion? Asked Melisandre. The one prophesied to combat the Great Other? Jon shrugged, uncomfortable. Stannis is your Azor Ahai, or so you said. I want no part of these prophecies. She did not blink. I once thought Stannis the prince that was promised. My flames have guided me otherwise. Azor Ahai has been reborn in the north, reborn in the midst of salt and smoke. That is what I have seen, and I have seen a wolf. Jon didn't miss the meaning. He stepped back, turning his face away from the heat. I'm no one's champion, he said, keeping his tone measured. I vowed to wear the black until I die. That vow is all I have. Until you die, Melisandre said softly. Yes, death is always part of the story. She lifted one hand, pressing her palm close enough to the flames that Jon feared she might burn. But sometimes death is not an end, but a door. Davos cleared his throat, his eyes flicking between them. We've many practical concerns, my lady, he said, trying to disrupt the tension swirling in the air. Winter is upon us and the supply lines are perilous. Perhaps we might focus on making certain these men don't starve before we get tangled in any grand prophecies. Melisandre only gave him a faint, haunting smile. Practical concerns, she repeated. Yes, Lord Davos, they matter, as do the hearts of men. But hearts can be swayed by truth. What if the truth has been revealed? Would you conceal it? Jon answered before Davos could. What truth would that be? She regarded him. That the Lord of Light has chosen you. That you are Azor Ahai reborn. His breath ceased for a moment. You cannot say that, he hissed. The men will think I've turned into some sort of zealot. I'm their Lord Commander, not a prophesied savior. Would you have me lie? She asked calmly. You have seen the Whites, the Walkers. You have touched a darkness that few men have known. You are the one who unites people beyond the boundaries. You led the wildlings across the wall, forging alliances with those once called your enemies. Your blood runs hot with the Stark line, and I see your soul shining like a blade in the night. Jon stiffened, his pulse a drumbeat in his ears. He wanted to argue, but the memory of Harhome, of the Whites surging up the beach, froze the words in his throat. The feeling that had seized him then, a sense of horrifying destiny, returned. And yet, the rational part of him resisted. My lady, he began, but she silenced him with a small gesture. I tell you what I must, Melisandre said. The rest is in your hands. No more than a day later, Melisandre stepped out onto the courtyard of Castle Black at noon, when the pale sun hung overhead and the entire garrison was awake. She called for the attention of every man, every onlooker. Her voice, ringing clear like a bell, declared a message that many would come to remember for the rest of their lives. Hear me, the Red Woman cried. The Lord of Light has revealed a truth. Azor Ahai walks among us, reborn to defend the living. This is Jon Snow, Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. Look upon him and know that he is chosen. A hush fell over the courtyard, interrupted only by the restless stamp of boots on snow. A few men snickered, uncertain. Others exchanged uneasy looks. Tormund Giantsbane, standing near a brazier, cast a quizzical gaze at Jon. Samwell Tarly looked aghast, open-mouthed, shifting from one foot to the other. Jon, who had just emerged from the mess hall, felt his heart pound. He clenched his fists at his sides. This was exactly what he had feared. The men began murmuring. Some stepped forward, curiosity brimming in their eyes, while others withdrew, suspicion etched on their faces. In that moment, Jon wished he could vanish. He was no chosen champion. He was just a bastard of Winterfell, a steward turned commander by a fluke of circumstances. Yet Melisandre's words hung in the cold, capturing attention in a net of heated wonder. No prophecy had ever been so boldly proclaimed at the Wall. The rumor would travel quickly from Castle Black to Eastwatch and beyond. It would slip through the cracks of the Seven Kingdoms, riding on raven's wings, capturing imaginations. Jon Snow is Azor Ahai reborn, the rumor would say. And no matter how much Jon might protest, it would spread faster than wildfire. The days that followed were tumultuous. The men were torn between confusion, awe, and cynicism. Some recognized Melisandre's voice as the same voice that had once declared Stannis Baratheon the Chosen One. Now she claimed she had been mistaken, that the truth was revealed in new fires. Others whispered that her powers were not to be trifled with. Had she not birthed shadows? Had she not resurrected kings in spirit, if not in flesh? Jon struggled to maintain order. Brothers of the Watch approached him privately, their eyes flicking with uncertainty. "Is it true, Lord Commander?" they asked. "Are you really this hero the Red Woman says?" Jon's answer was invariably the same. "I'm just a man of the Night's Watch, sworn to defend the realms of men." But the seeds of doubt and belief had been planted. Where once the men had followed him out of respect or duty, some now followed him with almost religious fervor, while others turned away, uneasy. The wildlings, too, showed a new deference or, in some cases, new hostility. Tormund only shook his head in mild amusement, claiming that if Jon was a savior, he'd best prove it with a good drink and a strong right arm. But others, especially those who had suffered grievously at Harhome, began to speak Jon's name as if it carried a power of its own. They had seen the White Walkers slaughter hundreds, thousands, in an instant. If there was a champion who could stand against them, they would cling to that hope no matter how tenuous. Stannis Baratheon's reaction was swift. The king in the north, so he called himself, summoned Jon to his war council in a makeshift hall at the base of the wall. Men of House Baratheon, remnants of the king's forces, and several Northmen who had declared for him stood in tense silence when Jon arrived. Stannis wore a frown, the lines on his face deeper than ever. His eyes, hard as flint, turned toward the door at Jon's entrance. "You've heard the Red Woman's words," Stannis said by way of greeting, voice low and cold. "You stand accused of stealing my destiny, Snow. Or so it seems." Jon stood tall. "I had no hand in it, Your Grace," he said, keeping his tone respectful. "I did not ask her to declare me anything." Stannis's gaze darted to Melisandre, who stood to the side, her presence like a streak of living flame in the gloom of the hall. "You told me I was Azor Ahai," the king said, voice tinged with old anger. "Now you speak otherwise? What say you?" Her face was placid, sure. "Your Grace, the flames once showed me the path you were meant to tread, but the truth can shift like the flicker of a candle. My readings grew clearer once the darkness at the wall pressed closer. Jon Snow is the prince that was promised." Stannis's mouth tightened. "And what of my rightful claim to the Iron Throne?" "I never questioned your claim by birth or by law," Melisandre replied. "Yet the champion to fight the great other has changed. My flames speak a new name. If we do not heed it, all claims and thrones become meaningless under the long night." Jon felt the tension in the room like a bowstring, taut and ready to snap. He measured his words carefully. "Your Grace, I have no intention to undermine your rule. The Watch takes no part in the wars of the Seven Kingdoms, and I have sworn to remain neutral. I do not want this prophecy. I do not desire any throne." Stannis studied him. His scowl remained, but he recognized truth in Jon's tone. "Melisandre's words have already cast doubts among my men," the king said. "If I am not the chosen one, some will ask why they fight for me at all. Do you see what chaos this can bring?" Jon swallowed. I see. What is your plan to manage it?" Jon met Stannis's gaze, unflinching. "We face a far greater enemy than each other, or any man in the South. The White Walkers do not care who sits the Iron Throne. All I can promise is that I will do my duty. I will fortify the wall, gather those who will fight. Whether or not I am Azor Ahai, I know what I have seen. The living must stand together or we fall." Stannis grunted, perhaps satisfied with the response, perhaps not. "Very well. You'll continue your duties. I'll not dispute the Red Woman in open conflict. Let the men believe what they will. But know this, Lord Commander. If you are truly Azor Ahai, I expect you to wield Lightbringer when the time comes. If not, I will not abide illusions to hinder my cause." Jon only nodded. He had no desire to quarrel with Stannis, though inwardly he felt no more certain of his destiny than he had before. He left the war council with a weight pressing on his mind, heavier than any armor. Azor Ahai. The words echoed, taunting him. He felt no holy fire burning in his veins, no mystic compulsion. All he felt was responsibility. The ravens carried the Red Woman's declaration to every corner of the north. The northern lords, fierce and proud, reacted with varying degrees of skepticism and intrigue. Some remembered the old tales told by their grandmothers. A man of dragonsteel forging a blade under the beating heart of a dying lover, a hero who ended the long night. Others scoffed, calling it a red priestess's trick. A handful saw an opportunity, especially those who had lost faith in southern kings. A wave of speculation and rumor began to swirl around Jon Snow's name. Whispers of the new Azor Ahai flickered in taverns, holdfasts, and keeps across the north. At Winterfell, where the Boltons held power, Roose Bolton received the news with narrowed eyes and a calculating mind. His bastard son, Ramsay, only laughed in derision. Jon Snow, a hero? Ramsay sneered. A bastard, a turncloak, and a traitor to the Night's Watch if he meddles in the affairs of the kingdom. Let him come. I delight in skinning the hero of the realm. But Roose, quieter, noted that a figure of prophecy could rally men. Men rallied behind hope, and hope was a weapon as sharp as any blade. He dispatched letters quickly, seeking alliances and tightening his hold, uncertain whether to confront this emerging threat or ignore it until forced to act. Meanwhile, in the Vale, Peter Baelish raised a slender brow as he read the Raven's message, the corners of his lips curling. He'd always had a taste for chaos, for the openings it created. A bastard boy declared a messiah, what wondrous chaos. Sansa Stark, hidden under his protection for the moment, watched him warily, suspecting that every new rumor was another tool for Littlefinger's cunning manipulations. In King's Landing, word traveled more slowly, hindered by the harsh snows already drifting south. Yet eventually the news reached Cersei Lannister's ears. The Queen Regent smirked behind her goblet of wine. Another farce from the frozen wastes, she said. Let the crows freeze up there. The dead or White Walkers or legends matter not. We will handle real threats when they come. She was deep in her own intrigues, her own illusions of power. But even in the capital, talk of the new Azor Ahai stoked curiosity, especially among those who still worshipped the Seven. Rumors about old prophecies were seldom taken lightly in a world scarred by Targaryen dragons, Baratheon rebellions, and Lannister gold. For Jon Snow, the immediate concern was less about distant politics and more about holding Castle Black together. The rifts caused by Melisandre's public declaration widened daily. Some of the Watch, typically those who distrusted magic and prophecy, withdrew their support from Jon, claiming he was dabbling in red sorcery. Others, particularly younger recruits who had seen Hardhome's horrors, found new conviction in the idea that Jon was destined to save them. Between the two extremes, Sam tried to patch conflicts with reason and pleas for unity. I never asked for this, Jon told Sam in the library, where they often sought refuge from the bitter cold outside. Jon had come to discuss logistics, grain stocks, oil for the lanterns, the possibility of forging new arrowheads. Instead, he found himself confiding in his old friend. Melisandre's words have done more harm than good. Sam pushed his spectacles higher on his nose. But there might be some advantage to it, Jon. If people believe you're this prophesied hero, maybe more will rally to the Watch. Maybe we can gather enough men to hold the wall when the time comes. Jon raked a hand through his black hair. There's no victory in illusions. If we base our defenses on a lie. But is it a lie? Sam asked gently. You've done things no one else dared. Let the wildlings through, face the others, united men who would rather kill each other. Maybe the Lord of Light does want you for something. I wish he didn't, Jon said, voice low. I wish we could just focus on building a shield for the living without magical claims. But Melisandre won't let this go. And she did not. Not a day passed that she failed to remind him of the import of her visions. Sometimes she spoke of Lightbringer, the fiery sword Azor Ahai was prophesied to wield. She had tried forging a sword for Stannis once upon a time, naming it Lightbringer, but it had proven hollow. Now her gaze lingered on Longclaw, Jon's Valyrian steel blade. The runes in that steel glinted each time she glanced at it, and though the sword bore the head of a dire wolf, she spoke as if she saw something else in the metal, a living flame that waited to be awakened. Weeks turned to months, the snows deepening. Supply caravans struggled to reach Castle Black. The winter's chill seeped into bones, hearts, and minds. Yet the rumor of Azor Ahai reborn refused to fade. The North was a land of stubborn pragmatists, but also of old gods and ancient superstitions. More and more, as darkness grew and monstrous storms battered them, men found comfort in the possibility that a champion stood in the far north, anointed by a fiery god to hold back the shadows. It was in the aftermath of a fierce blizzard that the first group of northern bannermen arrived at Castle Black, led by Lord Wyman Manderley of White Harbor. They arrived ragged, half-frozen, and short on rations, bearing a white banner with a merman. When Jon went out to greet them, Lord Wyman, large and heavy-set, knelt in the snow with surprising agility for a man of his size. "My lord," Jon began, startled. "You needn't." "Rise, Azor Ahai," Lord Wyman said, his booming voice echoing across the yard. "We come to lend what aid we can." Then, more quietly, so only Jon and a few near him could hear, he added, "If you truly are our champion, we pledge yourselves to aid you in the coming war. If this is but a rumor, we will still fight for the realm against whatever lurks beyond the wall." Jon felt a surge of conflicting emotions. Pride, apprehension, gratitude, guilt? He urged Manderley to stand. "Lord Wyman, the Night's Watch takes no sides in the realm's disputes. I cannot accept oaths of fealty. But we can fight together against the real enemy." Manderley rose, eyes gleaming with determination. "Then consider us your allies, for the living must stand together. Whatever else occurs in the south, we must guard the north from these White Walkers. If it helps the men to believe you are the chosen champion, then let it be so. I, for one, have heard enough rumors of dark horrors to be convinced we need every advantage." In the weeks that followed, more small groups trickled in, each battered by the unrelenting storms, each bearing a different sigil. The Riswells, a few men from House Serwyn, stragglers from House Tallheart. They came not to swear fealty to the Night's Watch, Jon forbid that, yet they came seeking guidance, help, or in some cases, to see the rumored Azor Ahai for themselves. And with each arrival, the friction within the Watch increased. Never before had the Watch been so entangled with the movements of lords and their men. By the tenets of their order, the Watch was meant to remain neutral. But neutrality became a fragile concept when the gates of the Wall admitted men who might or might not be loyal to the Boltons or the Baratheons or even the Greyjoys. Amid this gathering storm, Melisandre's presence loomed. She held nightly ceremonies to praise the Lord of Light, lighting great fires in the courtyard, chanting prayers. Some of the Watchers were enthralled, others dismissed it. Jon observed these rituals only rarely, preferring to keep to his duties. Yet he could not deny a faint pull, a strange stirring when he passed by the flames and heard the chanting. It was as if a voice whispered to him, urging him closer. One night, he dreamt of a sword in flames and a wolf with burning eyes. The wolf's fur was white, like Ghost, but Ghost was nowhere in sight. Instead, the dream wolf turned and fixed Jon with a gaze of such intensity that he woke drenched in sweat. He reached for Ghost, found the dire wolf curled at the foot of his bed, fast asleep. Jon lay awake for hours, heart pounding, mind swirling with half-imagined portents. The next day, while training with the men in the yard, Jon heard a frantic call from atop the wall. "Riders from the south," the watchman shouted. "They carry Stark banners." Jon's heart leapt. Could it be Rickon, or perhaps a distant cousin from the Umbers bringing news? He hurried up the icy steps to get a view. A column of riders emerged, their horses struggling through the deep drifts. At the head of the column was none other than Sansa Stark, cloaked in thick fur, her face set with determination. Beside her rode Brienne of Tarth, ever watchful. Jon's chest constricted at the sight of his half-sister, whom he had feared lost. He ordered the gates to be opened immediately. Men scrambled to greet them. The courtyard flooded with watchers. "Sansa," Jon breathed as he rushed forward. She dismounted and he embraced her, forgetting for a moment his duties, his burdens. She was thinner than he remembered, her eyes carrying a quiet sorrow, but she returned his embrace. It was an odd moment, bittersweet, filled with relief, overshadowed by the swirl of men who had come to see the rumored Azor Ahai greet his kin. They retreated inside to warmth and privacy, where Sansa recounted her journey, fleeing King's Landing, her forced marriage to Ramsay Bolton, her escape aided by Theon, and her time under Peter Baelish's manipulations in the Vale. Now she had come north, determined to rally support against the Boltons and reclaim Winterfell. "The Boltons are traitors," she said, her voice trembling with rage barely contained. "They hold our home and they torment any who oppose them." Jon's brow knotted with concern. "I cannot lead the Night's Watch against them, Sansa. You know that. My vow, eh?" She reached for his hand. "But you're more than just Lord Commander now. The lords who gather here do so because they see you as a protector, a leader. You have influence. I've seen what's happening here. Men talk about you. They call you Azor Ahai." Jon bristled. "That's Melisandre's doing. I didn't ask for it." Sansa's eyes were sad but resolute. "But it exists, Jon. This legend. If you can leverage it, if you can stand with us, we can take Winterfell back, unite the North for real. And if the White Walkers come, we'll have the entire North behind you to face them." He hesitated, torn. "I have responsibilities here. The Wall must hold. The Watch cannot openly go to war, or I break the oath." Sansa bit her lip. "I don't ask for the Night's Watch to fight. I ask for Jon Snow, my brother, to help me free Winterfell. You were never truly a bastard, nor truly a mere brother of the Watch in my eyes. You are a Stark in your heart, if not in name. Would you let the Boltons reign unchallenged? Would you let them feed on the fear of our people while you stand idle behind your vows?" Her words cut deep. Jon recalled the battered, desperate men who had come seeking his aid, the frightened orphans who had trickled to Castle Black from the Bolton-held north, telling tales of cruelty. He remembered the bones of Winterfell, burned by Theon and left in ruins only to be seized by the Boltons. Could he truly remain idle? That evening, while the snows raged outside, Jon sat by the hearth in the Lord Commander's chambers, wrestling with his conscience. Ghost lay by the fire, ears perked. Melisandre stood against the wall, silent for once, as if respecting his turmoil. At last, Jon spoke. "I need your counsel," he said, startling himself with the admission. He rarely sought advice from the Red Woman, but the time for pride was over. She dipped her head. "You know what my counsel will be, Jon Snow. You cannot hide behind neutrality. The Lord of Light has chosen you. The darkness gathers. The Boltons serve only themselves, sowing horror. They have weakened the North. The real war cannot be won by a land divided." Jon stared at the flames. "If I ride south, I abandon my oath. But if I do not, I abandon my family and the people who look to me." His voice was hoarse with conflict. Melisandre stepped closer to the fire. "The old ways, the old vows, mean little when the dead walk. You do not betray your oath by defending the living." Jon inhaled sharply. "This is not only about the White Walkers. This is about men fighting men over a castle. It is about forging alliances, bringing the North under one banner. So that when the real threat comes, you will have an army at your back. If you truly are the champion of light, you will need all the strength of the living." Her words resonated with him. He hated that they did. He wanted to cling to the comfort of his vow, the purity of the Night's Watch. But the lines were blurred now, dashed into obscurity by the onslaught of winter, by the injustices inflicted upon the North, by the living dead beyond the wall. Could he truly keep the Watch strong if the Bolton terror continued? Would men keep flocking to Castle Black, or would they hide in fear, cowering under bastard tyranny? Eventually, the choice came upon him as heavily as any sword. He sent ravens to the scattered northern houses, declaring a council at Castle Black, inviting them to discuss the threat of the White Walkers and how best to unite. He sent one to Mormont's heir on Bear Island, to Lady Lyanna. He sent one to the new Lord of House Glover, to House Mason, House Merton, House Slate. He even sent one to the Umbers, though word said they had bent the knee to Ramsay. Let them come. Let them see. At the council, which took place in a vast tunnel near the wall's base, converted into a makeshift hall due to the crowd, Jon addressed the lords, ladies, and sworn swords who had risked the harsh roads to attend. Melisandre stood behind him, her red robes a stark contrast to the dark furs around her. Tormund Giantsbane lounged off to the side, arms crossed, occasionally muttering curses about Kneeler squabbles. Davos Seaworth hovered behind Stannis, though the tension between Stannis and Melisandre was palpable. Jon began simply, recounting the horrors beyond the wall, the resurrection of corpses, the unstoppable advance of the White Walkers. He spoke of Har Home, how thousands perished only to rise again. He described the urgent need for the North to be united, to gather provisions, to train every capable person in the art of war. "Winter is not coming," he said, his voice echoing against the cold stone. "It's here. And with it comes an enemy we have not seen in ages." Then he turned to the Boltons, to the crimes they committed. He did not speak with flowery language or vengeance-laced words. He simply stated the truth, flaying, terror, and subjugation. "We cannot march against the dead while a dagger's at our back," he said. "We cannot join forces with monsters. If we want a united front, the Boltons must be dealt with. I do not speak for the Night's Watch in this. I speak as Jon Snow, a man of the North, a son of Eddard Stark by blood if not by name." Murmurs rippled at that acknowledgement. "If you join me, we will drive them out of Winterfell, free the North from terror, and prepare ourselves for the true war that looms." An uncomfortable hush followed. Lords cast sidelong glances, uncertain. Some were allied with Stannis, who stood rigidly, face carved of stone. Others remembered Robb Stark and how the Boltons betrayed him. Some worried that the Night's Watch was overstepping its bounds. But there was a tension, a yearning for hope. They had all heard the rumors of Jon Snow, Azor Ahai, champion of the Lord of Light. Even those who did not believe in red gods believed in the darkness beyond the wall. If Jon's leadership provided the best chance of survival, many were inclined to follow. Finally, Lady Lyanna Mormont, a girl of no more than a dozen years, stood to speak. She was small, but her voice carried firm resolve. "House Mormont remembers. We remember that the Boltons betrayed the North. We remember that you, Jon Snow, have fought for the good of the realm against the wildlings and the dead. We will stand behind you, Azor Ahai or not, because the North knows no king but the king in the North, whose name is Stark." She paused, surveying the crowd with a fierce gaze that made many grown men look away. "You say you're a Stark in blood. That's enough for me. Bear Island stands with House Stark. The words sparked something in the crowd. Lord Wyman Mandoli nodded, a hand stroking his white beard. Aye. White Harbor stands as well. We serve the merman, but we loved the wolf. Our blades are yours, Snow, if you'll guide us to victory. Others joined, voices rising. A handful remained hesitant, but the tide was shifting. A wave of pent-up frustration and fear found release in the prospect of uniting behind a figure who was rumored to wield divine favor. Some believed wholeheartedly, others saw only pragmatic opportunity. But for one night, it seemed the North was rising again. Stannis Baratheon did not stand to declare his support. He remained silent, arms folded, jaw clenched. His men looked to him, uncertain. But Melisandre's declaration had shifted loyalties. If the Red Woman said Stannis was no longer the chosen one, what good was he in the eyes of those seeking a messianic leader? Davos tried to speak reason, but the fervor in the hall was intense. Some of Stannis's men, particularly those from the northern houses who had once pledged to him, now shifted their stance toward Jon. A rift formed, deep and irreparable. After the council concluded, Jon felt the weight of a new burden. Though he had insisted the Watch remain neutral, he personally had become a rallying point. The men who cried out for Azor Ahai were now calling upon him to lead the conquest of Winterfell. As the night wore on, he sought a moment's peace by the weirwood grove adjacent to Castle Black, a place where the old gods watched with carved faces. Snow drifted among the pale trunks. Jon knelt, breath misting in the stillness, and tried to pray. He didn't know who he prayed to, maybe the old gods, maybe Lawler, maybe just the memory of his father. The weirwood's face was silent, but the wind whispered through the branches. Eventually, he felt a presence behind him. He turned to see Sansa, cloaked in fur, her hair catching the moonlight. She knelt beside him, eyes on the carved face, and spoke softly. We've lost so much, Jon. Father, Mother, Robb. The others scattered. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. He reached for her hand and squeezed gently. Nor are you. She took a shaky breath. If you weren't here, I would have tried this alone, but I'm glad I don't have to. We can face them together. We can rebuild our family, our home. Jon looked at her. But what if Melisandre is wrong? What if I'm just some bastard destined for nothing more than an arrow through the chest? Sansa offered a small, sad smile. Then we will fight anyway and do our best. Prophecy or not, you've proven yourself a leader. You united the wildlings. That alone is a miracle no one else has done. He bowed his head, uncertain comfort stirring. The quiet companionship of his sister in that moment gave him strength. After a while, they stood, returning inside before the cold could fully numb their hands and faces. Preparations began in earnest. Though official Night's Watch involvement was minimal, Jon found ways to assist in the upcoming campaign to oust the Boltons. He allowed the assembled northern forces to camp in the sheltered area near Castle Black. He permitted Tormund and the Free Folk to forge a fragile alliance with the Northern Bannermen, an uneasy arrangement but one that slowly gained acceptance as both sides realized the White Walkers were a more fearsome enemy than each other. Men drilled in the snow-covered courtyards. They fletched arrows, sharpened swords, hammered out dents in battered armor. They shared stories by the fire, forging a tenuous camaraderie. Whispers of Jon's destiny spread. Some nights, Melisandre performed rites, proclaiming the day of vengeance was at hand, urging men to place their faith in the Lord of Light and his champion. This grated on some of the more devout worshippers of the old gods or the Seven, but few had the desire to challenge the Red Woman openly. Her mystique and rumors of her shadowy powers kept them silent. Amid it all, Jon struggled to keep his identity as Lord Commander intact. He designated Ser Alliser Thorne, never his friend but grudgingly reliable, to oversee the day-to-day discipline of the Night's Watch. He entrusted Sam with finalizing supply counts. He assigned men to maintain patrols atop the wall, to keep vigilance for Whites, for White Walkers, for raiders. The tensions were mounting, and he could feel the order pulling in two directions. Was he leading them astray, or was he ensuring the realm's only bulwark remained strong? The question plagued him as days turned to nights, each one colder than the last. When at last the Allied forces deemed themselves ready, the plan was simple and brutally direct: march on Winterfell, lay siege if necessary, and demand the Boltons surrender. If they refused, then steel and blood would decide. This time, Sansa insisted there would be no trusting the honor of their enemies. Ramsay Bolton thrived on deception and cruelty. They would come armed with a single objective: retake their ancestral seat. Jon stood at the head of the host with Sansa by his side, Tormund on one flank, Mandoli on the other. Melisandre sat astride a pale mare, her red robes like a living flame against the snow. The black banners of House Stark, emblazoned with the direwolf, flapped alongside the sigil of White Harbor, Bear Island, and lesser houses. Behind them marched thousands of feet, horses, wagons carrying supplies. Ghost padded silently, his white fur nearly invisible against the snows. As they advanced, a hush fell over the land. The wild, desolate north seemed to watch them. Each breath of wind stirred flakes of snow that shimmered in pale sunlight. Days passed in slow progress, hindered by drifts and hidden ice. Scouts reported small skirmishes with Bolton outriders, but no pitched battle. Ramsay was a cunning foe, likely planning something vile. But the allied host pressed on. On a frozen morning, the towers of Winterfell rose in the distance, a dark shape against the white sky. Jon felt his heart tighten. Memories flooded him, a boy running in the yard, practicing swordplay with Robb, teased good-naturedly by Theon. Ghosting around corners with Arya, trying to remain unseen. That was another life. Now, the seat was a stronghold of traitors. Riders from Winterfell emerged under the Flayed Man banner. Ramsay Bolton was among them, clad in dark furs. He halted far enough from Jon's lines to avoid arrow fire, but close enough that they could see the sneer on his face. "Jon Snow," he called in a mocking tone. "The bastard who calls himself Azor Ahai. Here to save the world, are you?" Jon rode forward, meeting him halfway, ghostly breath pluming in the cold air. "I've come to demand your surrender," Jon announced. "Return Winterfell to its rightful rulers, release any captives, and you may stand trial before the lords of the north." Ramsay laughed, sharp and deranged. "Trial? My father rules Winterfell by royal decree. And you come with your ragtag host? I hear you've gathered wildlings and peasants who think you're a god. Pathetic. Where's this flaming sword of yours? Or is that only in your bedtime stories?" Jon held Ramsay's gaze, anger simmering beneath his calm. "I've no need of tales. The north stands against you, Bolton." Behind Ramsay, men shifted, uncertain. But Ramsay's grin widened. "Not all the north. And I do not fear prophecies. If you want Winterfell, you'll have to take it. But if you do," he said, raising a hand, "know that I have a surprise for you." He gestured, and two guards hauled forward a chained figure, a stooped, trembling man, barely recognizable. Jon's breath caught as he realized it was Rickon Stark, dirty and disheveled, a rope around his neck. Sansa let out a sharp cry, spurring her horse forward. Jon reached out and grabbed her reins, halting her. Ramsay watched with glee. "Come and get him," he taunted. "Come and get your precious Stark. I'll give you a head start if you like." Jon's heart pounded. He could feel the tension, the rage. He wanted to charge forward and cut Ramsay down. But that was exactly what Ramsay wanted, to lure them into a reckless assault. Jon stayed his hand, glaring at the bastard of Bolton. "Harm him, and you will know no mercy," he warned. Ramsay only cackled, turning his horse to ride back to Winterfell, dragging Rickon behind. That night, under the starless sky, the men debated the best approach. Some wanted to storm the gates immediately. Others insisted on caution, that a frontal assault would be a massacre. Sansa was nearly hysterical with worry for Rickon. Jon tried to comfort her, even as he wrestled with the knowledge that they couldn't let emotion guide them into a trap. He had to be calm, strategic if they were to save Rickon and succeed. Melisandre, perched by a roaring fire, offered little comfort. "The flames show me battle," she said, voice soft. "Blood on snow and wolves among the carnage. I see a sword of flame. I see you, Jon Snow, amid the dead. I cannot tell the outcome." Jon ground his teeth. "That's not particularly helpful." She closed her eyes. "I only repeat what the Lord shows me." He walked away, leaving her with the dancing shadows. He found Tormund, who had little advice to give beyond the warrior's perspective. "Fight smart," Tormund said. "Boltons are cunning, so out-cunning them is best. A head-on fight is what they want, though. They're in a castle, are they not? We cannot starve them out easily. Winter is upon us, and we'd freeze." Sansa approached them, pressing them to consider infiltration, a covert operation to save Rickon, or at least get him out before the siege. Brienne nodded at the suggestion. "A small group might scale the walls at night. I've done such tasks before." Jon considered. "It's possible, but Ramsay will be expecting it. He's seen us gather here. And a castle as large as Winterfell has watchers everywhere. But still, if we do nothing, Rickon remains in his grasp. He is the rightful heir of Winterfell if Bran and Arya are truly gone." In the end, they settled on a risky plan: stage a siege with the main host, draw out Ramsay's men, while a small team of skilled climbers led by Brienne and a few wildlings adept at scaling ice attempted to breach a less guarded section of the wall. They would attempt to find Rickon and spirit him out. If discovered, they would at least sow chaos within the castle. Then, in the confusion, the main force would press advantage. The following dawn, the allied forces took position outside Winterfell, just beyond arrow range. Ramsay's men lined the ramparts. It was a grim tableau, a black and white painting of harsh winter and determined soldiers. Tension thrummed, hearts pounded. The memory of Rickon's broken form, dragged by a rope, fueled their resolve. Jon raised his sword, Longclaw, and signaled the men to advance in formation. Archers behind shield-bearers, cavalry on the flanks. Snow crunched beneath them. The gates loomed ominous. Hours passed with slow maneuvering, small skirmishes, and arrow volleys. The main host focused on threatening the gates, keeping Bolton men pinned along the walls. Meanwhile, Brienne and her stealth team skirted the perimeter, disappearing from view amid swirling flurries. Jon's mind was half on the battlefield, half on that infiltration team. He directed archers to loose arrows at any sign of a breach in the walls, while Tormund led a group to harass the gates. The clash of steel rang out sporadically. Faint screams echoed. Men slipped on ice, blood blossoming red on white. Through it all, Ramsay's mocking presence flickered at the battlements, occasionally loosing hounds that tore into the unlucky. As dusk crept in, a horn blew from the east side of the castle. Shouts erupted. For a brief, wild moment, Jon's heart soared. Could it be Brienne's signal? He raised his arm, giving the order for the cavalry to surge forward, a bold feint to draw Bolton troops away from the infiltration point. Horses thundered, hooves churning up snow. Bolton archers volleyed, some horses tumbling. Screams tore through the evening air. In the chaos, Jon glimpsed a figure scrambling over the castle walls, Brienne, or maybe one of the wildlings. They used ropes to descend. Another figure clung behind them, small and terrified. Rickon, he realized, hope roaring in his chest. They were escaping. But at that same moment, Jon saw a group of Bolton archers pivot, drawing bead on the escapees. He urged his horse forward, chest tight, but he was too far. A volley of arrows whistled through the gloom. Brienne twisted mid-descent, trying to shield Rickon. Some arrows found purchase. Jon bit back a cry, powerless to stop it. But the infiltration team had bows as well, and they loosed their own arrows at the Bolton archers. A brief exchange left men toppling from the ramparts. In the confusion, Brienne and Rickon slid the final yards to the ground. They vanished into the swirl of figures as allied men rushed to cover them. Jon's breath hammered in his chest. He could only pray they were still alive. This partial success emboldened the allied host. A great cheer went up. Sansa, safe in the command tent, heard the news that Rickon was rescued. She wept with relief, though no one knew if he was wounded or not. Furious at the development, Ramsay ordered a sally forth. Bolton cavalry charged out of Winterfell's gates to cut down the rescuers. Jon rallied his men to meet them in open field. It was a brutal clash. Horses collided, swords flashed. The snow churned muddy red. The northern lords fought with savage determination, cursing the flayed man banners as they cut down Bolton soldiers. Tormund's wildlings fought ferociously, many armed only with axes and spears, but their fury was unstoppable. The wind howled, carrying the cries of the dying. Snow drifted across the battlefield, obscuring friend and foe alike. Jon found himself face to face with a mounted Bolton knight. Their swords met, Longclaw's Valyrian steel slicing through the man's simpler blade, splintering it. The knight tumbled from his horse, and Jon galloped past, scanning for Ramsay. The swirl of chaos made it near impossible to see more than a few feet. Jon's breath steamed, and the tang of copper lay thick on his tongue. At one point, he glimpsed Ramsay perched behind a line of mounted guards. Ramsay's eyes shone with a kind of vicious delight. He let slip his hounds upon a group of wounded men. Jon roared, spurring his mount to intervene, but the press of bodies slowed him. Screams echoed as the dogs tore flesh. Jon's fury ignited. He hacked his way through, Ghost at his heel, the direwolf savaging any foe who strayed too near. Melisandre watched from a slight rise near the back, flanked by Davos and a few men, chanting prayers that carried oddly over the din. Fire crackled in her outstretched hand. Those who saw it claimed to witness a glow around Jon, an aura of light that flickered each time he struck an enemy. Some said it was reflection off the snow, others whispered it was the power of Lawler. Reality and myth melded in the swirl of violence. If fear is a weapon, so too is faith. Gradually, the Bolton forces began to buckle. Their sally had failed to smash the allied lines. Men retreated toward the gates. Ramsay cursed them, loosing arrow after arrow from his horse. But even he could see the tide turning. The gates slammed shut, leaving many Bolton soldiers outside to be overrun or forced to surrender. Those inside prepared for a siege. In the aftermath, the allied host regrouped. Bodies lay thick on the field, men from both sides moaning in the blood-stained snow. Jon dismounted, searching frantically for Rickon among the living. He found Brienne, armor pierced by 2 arrows, kneeling over a still shape. Blood seeped through the snow beneath the figure. When Jon drew closer, he realized it was Rickon, eyes half-lidded, an arrow in his side. Panic lanced Jon's heart. He dropped to his knees. "Rickon," he whispered, pressing a hand to his brother's cheek. Rickon was barely conscious, lips pale, breath coming in shallow rasps. Jon shouted for a maester, for supplies, anything. The boy stirred, eyes flickering. "Jon, you came," he mumbled, voice a faint ghost of sound. "I'm here," Jon said, voice thick. "Hold on. We'll get you help." Brienne tried to stanch the bleeding. "He's lost a lot of blood," she said, her usual calm laced with worry. "I did my best, but..." Melisandre appeared then as if summoned by fate, her scarlet cloak billowing. She knelt, pressing her hands to Rickon's wound. She closed her eyes and began to murmur words in a foreign tongue, calling upon Lawler. Jon felt warmth emanate from her palms, saw the faint flicker of light dancing over Rickon's skin. For a moment, time seemed suspended. Soldiers stood by, transfixed, watchers on the edge of a miracle or a farce. Slowly, Rickon's breath deepened. His eyes opened wider. The arrow still protruded from his side, but the gushing blood slowed. Melisandre guided Brienne's hands to pull out the arrow, then pressed her palms over the wound again, chanting. The hush among the surrounding men was absolute. When at last she lifted her hands, Rickon gave a ragged cough, but he was breathing on his own. Color returned to his cheeks. Jon stared in amazement, tears threatening to spill. "You saved him," he said to Melisandre. She inclined her head, weary, sweat beading her brow despite the biting cold. "The Lord of Light allowed me to help," she said, her voice unsteady. "But I do not have power enough to raise an army of dead men. This was but a small grace. We must see to the rest of the battle." The allied host quickly established a field camp. Healers tended the wounded. Jon ensured Rickon was placed in the care of the best resources they had. Sansa, upon hearing that Rickon was alive, wept openly with relief and gratitude. But they all knew the struggle was not over. Winterfell's walls still stood. Ramsay Bolton remained within, likely plotting more horrors. For 3 days and 3 nights, the allied forces laid siege. Walls were battered, trenches dug, rams built. The thunder of war echoed off ancient stones. Ramsay taunted them from within, sending out nighttime raiders to harass the camp. Each time, the watchers on the walls repelled them, though it cost. The siege was brutal, reminiscent of earlier wars the North had seen, but never with winter's chill this fierce, never with a prophecy hanging over the battlefield like a flaming sword. On the 4th day, a raven arrived from the wall, bringing dire news that whites had been sighted near Eastwatch by the sea. Not a full army, but enough to raise fear that the White Walkers were no longer content to linger in the far north. Jon felt the urgency press upon him like an iron gauntlet closing around his chest. They had to finish this quickly. They needed Winterfell as a rallying point, or they needed to abandon it and rush back to the wall. That morning, as the pale sun rose, the allied forces prepared for a final assault. Ramsay had thus far refused all terms of surrender. The men were fatigued, battered, but determined. Jon stood at the forefront, riding a borrowed warhorse. His black cloak streamed behind him. Longclaw gleamed in the winter sunlight. Ghost prowled alongside, ears flattened, muzzle stained from previous battles. A hush descended over the field as Jon raised his sword. They charged, a mass of men and steel surging toward Winterfell's batter gates. Siege weapons pounded the walls. Ladders were raised against the battlements. Arrows flew. The defenders fought fiercely, but they were outnumbered, demoralized. The thirst for an end to Bolton rule spurred the attackers on. House Mormont, House Manderley, wildlings, and remnants of other loyal northern houses flung themselves at the ramparts. Jon led by example, ascending a ladder himself when the men hesitated. He climbed, breath ragged, sword strapped to his back, ghostly plumes in the freezing air. Arrows whizzed past. He reached the top, engaged a Bolton soldier, parrying a blow that nearly sent him over the edge. He retaliated, dispatching the man with a sure thrust. More came at him. The rampart was slick with ice and blood. Tormund scrambled up behind him, letting out a war cry as he laid into the Bolton defenders with savage fury. Gradually, the allied men gained the walls. They poured onto the ramparts, forcing the Bolton defenders back. Shouts echoed below as the gates were pounded. Great cracks splintered the wood. Horses burst through, men flooding into the courtyard. Panic gripped the Bolton lines. Some surrendered on the spot, throwing down weapons. Others fought to the death. Jon advanced through the chaos, flanked by Ghost. He headed toward the great hall where Ramsay might be holed up. On the way, he encountered pockets of vicious resistance. At one point, a crossbow bolt grazed his shoulder, tearing through fur and leather. He grunted in pain but pressed on. Ghost leapt upon the crossbowman, dragging him down. Bodies littered the courtyard, snow churned red. The stench was overpowering. Finally, near the entrance of the main keep, Jon saw Ramsay Bolton standing alone amidst the carnage, flanked by 2 hounds bearing bloody teeth. Ramsay wore a twisted smile. "Hello, brother," he said mockingly, voice cutting through the din. "Come to finish me off with your fiery sword? Show me your prophecy, O chosen one." Jon advanced, hefting Longclaw in a guard position. "You lost, Ramsay. Call off your men." Ramsay ran a hand through his oily hair. "Lost? Me? I don't think so. Winterfell is mine. I took it and I'll not give it up to some bastard and his superstitions." His hounds growled low. "But let's have some fun first." Without warning, Ramsay loosed a flurry of throwing knives. Jon dove to the side, one blade nicking his cheek. Ghost lunged, fangs bared. Ramsay's hounds tore at Ghost. The direwolf snarled, engaging them in a fierce struggle. Jon lunged forward, swinging Longclaw. Ramsay darted back, agile. He drew a dagger in each hand, slashing at Jon's exposed side. Jon parried, the steel ringing out in savage harmony. The courtyard seemed to fade away. All Jon saw was Ramsay's sneering face, all he heard was the roar of blood in his ears. Grief and anger surged through him, fueling each strike. He recalled all the suffering caused by the Boltons, the betrayal of Robb, the torture of countless innocents, the near loss of Rickon, the torment inflicted upon Sansa. The last vestiges of hesitation fell away. He hammered Ramsay's defenses, driving him back. But Ramsay was wily. He feinted, leading Jon astray, then jabbed a dagger at Jon's ribs. Jon twisted, the blade catching his cloak, tearing it. Ghost, bloodied from the hounds, sank his teeth into one of Ramsay's beasts, tearing its throat. The other turned on Ghost and they wrestled in a frenzy. Jon seized the moment of distraction to press forward. He knocked one dagger from Ramsay's grip. Ramsay snarled, brandishing the other. They exchanged blows again. A final clash ended in Jon disarming Ramsay, sending the dagger clattering across the frozen ground. Ramsay stumbled, panting, a thin line of blood on his lip. Jon leveled Longclaw at his chest, heart pounding like a war drum. Boltons lay dead around them and the allied men had secured the courtyard. Ramsay spat blood. "Go on then. Kill me. It won't change a thing. The monsters beyond the wall will kill you all." Jon's grip tightened on Longclaw. Fury threatened to consume him, but he remembered who he was. Slowly he lowered his blade. "You'll stand trial for your crimes," he declared. "The North will judge you." Ramsay's face twisted in a final sneer. "You're a coward," he began. But he never finished. A gray-fletched arrow sprouted from his throat. Jon whipped around, startled. Sansa stood behind him, bow in hand, tears streaming down her cheeks. She lowered the bow slowly, trembling. A hush followed as Ramsay's corpse slumped into the bloody snow. No one moved. Jon let out a breath, turning to Sansa. Her eyes shone with a mix of heartbreak and grim satisfaction. "I couldn't let him live," she whispered, voice cracking. "Not after what he did, Jon." He understood. He nodded, and she released a ragged sob, letting the bow slip from her fingers. The swirl of battle around them quieted. The Boltons were defeated, their banners torn down. Winterfell was retaken. And so, under the pale sky streaked with the last rays of a dying sun, Jon Snow stood in the courtyard of Winterfell, battered sword in hand, Ghost beside him, Sansa weeping softly, Rickon recovering from his wound in the great hall. Men cheered, proclaiming the end of Bolton rule. Some cried out for Jon, calling him their savior, Azor Ahai. Others simply shouted in relief, praising the Starks or the old gods. Melisandre watched from the sidelines, flames dancing in her eyes, whispering thanks to Lawler for bringing to pass what she had seen in her fires. But Jon felt no great triumph, only a weary sense of duty fulfilled. He remembered the Raven's message, the White Walkers near Eastwatch. This victory was but a prelude to a much larger war. The true test of Azor Ahai, if ever he was that, awaited beyond the wall. Winterfell was free, but the world was far from saved. That night, in the Great Hall, the Allied forces took stock of their losses. Many good men had died. The wounded moaned for milk of the poppy. Fires lit the corners of the hall. Outside, snow continued to drift, blanketing corpses still waiting to be buried. Jon convened a gathering of the Northern Lords. Sansa sat to his right, a quiet pillar of resolve. Rickon, bandaged but alive, rested on a pallet near the fire. Tormund, Davos, Manderly, and Lyanna Mormont were present. Stannis, glowering, stood with his few remaining men. Melisandre was there, silent as a statue of flaming stone. When the lords pressed Jon to accept his rightful place as Lord of Winterfell, as king in the north, he hesitated. "The Night's Watch vow forbids me," he began, but Sansa touched his arm gently. "You have served the Watch faithfully," she said, "but your duty to the realm is greater now. We all know the threat beyond the wall. You are the one who can unite us. If that oath prevents you from doing so, then let it be set aside in the face of an existential threat. Or break it and let the gods judge your reasons." Lord Wyman Manderly rumbled agreement. Lady Mormont nodded firmly. The hall reverberated with calls. "King in the North! King in the North!" Some men who had once served the Boltons even joined in, relieved to be rid of Ramsay's madness. Others who once looked to Stannis shifted uncomfortably, uncertain. Jon stood, weighed down by the chanting. He thought of how Robb once wore the crown of the North only to meet betrayal and death. Finally he spoke, voice carrying over the tumult. "I am no king," he said, and the calls quieted to a hush. "I've no birthright for it, no desire for a throne. But I cannot deny that we need unity now more than ever. The White Walkers march. If I must lead, I will. But understand, it is not for glory or power. It is to stand between the living and the dead." A moment of silence followed, broken by Lady Lyanna's resolute voice. "The North remembers. We know no king but the king in the North, whose name is Stark." She looked directly at Jon. "You are of their blood, no matter what you call yourself. Let it be done." Sansa stepped forward, clasping Jon's hand. "I've no claim greater than yours. Father would be proud to see you protect these lands." Jon inhaled, nodding. He turned to Stannis, standing stiffly. "Your Grace, you once sought northern support. It appears that support has chosen otherwise. I do not wish war with you, but the North has made its choice. If you will remain, remain as an ally. If not, go in peace." Stannis's mouth was a grim slash. Davos gently laid a hand on the king's shoulder, murmuring something. Finally, Stannis bowed his head a fraction, a sign of reluctant acceptance. "The realm is bigger than any crown," he said, perhaps echoing something Davos had said to him in private. "You have your war to fight. The Lord of Light's champion or not, you stand for the living. I will not hinder you. If it be that all men must unite against the dead, then here is where we stand, side by side, until the last." That night, in the crypts of Winterfell, Jon stood before the statue of Eddard Stark. A single torch flickered in his hand, casting dancing shadows on the carved stone face that bore only a passing resemblance to the father he remembered. Soft footsteps approached. Melisandre. He did not turn as she came to stand beside him, her red robes rustling. "You carry a great burden," she said, voice hushed in the stillness. Jon nodded. "I never wanted power. But we stand at a crossroads. If the North is to survive, it must be united." Melisandre gazed at Ned Stark's statue with an air of curiosity. "The old gods watch, but Lawler is the fire in the darkness. I told you the prophecy would bring you here. You said I was Azor Ahai," Jon murmured, voice echoing. "I still don't know what that means. Will I truly wield a sword of fire? Must I sacrifice someone I love as the legend claims? I won't do that." Her eyes flickered. Prophecies often unfold in ways we cannot predict. But some truths stand. You must face the great other. Only by uniting the living can you hope to triumph. That is your purpose. He let out a long breath, feeling the chill of the crypt. "Then we'll do it our way? No more talk of sacrifices." She watched him, a faint smile ghosting her lips. "Your way, yes. I've seen glimmers in the flames, victory tempered with great loss. But also hope. You shine, Jon Snow, whether or not you acknowledge the prophecy." He extinguished the torch, plunging them into darkness, save for a faint glow emanating from the corridor behind. "Darkness is all I see now," he said softly. "Darkness and an endless winter. Then let your light burn all the brighter." With that, she turned and slipped away, leaving Jon alone with the silent stone lords of Winterfell's past. In the weeks to come, the battered fortress stirred with new life. Repairs were begun, the great hall reopened. Ravens flew day and night, calling the bannermen to gather, urging them to prepare arms against the White Walkers. More wildlings, free from fear of the Boltons, passed through the gates, forging an uneasy alliance with the northern lords. The black banner of House Stark was raised high, though the men beneath it hailed Jon Snow, the newly proclaimed king in the north, some with conviction, others with cautious hope. Outside, the snows deepened, the cold intensifying. Reports of white sightings became more frequent. Eastwatch by the sea faced relentless assaults by small bands of the dead. The others tested the realm's defenses, searching for weakness. Night's Watch patrols encountered the flicker of blue eyes in the darkness, forced to burn their fallen brothers to prevent them from rising again. Everywhere, the ice pressed in. But in the face of that darkness, a new sense of resolve spread through the north. Lords who once squabbled united beneath the banner of the dire wolf, spurred by tales of Jon's heroic deeds, the rumored powers of the Red Woman, and the stark truth of undead horrors. They trained day and night, forging dragonglass-tipped spears and arrows, stockpiling wildfire where they could. The clang of steel and the hammer of forges resounded through Winterfell's courtyards, an urgent chorus preparing for the war to come. As the final storms of winter raged across the land, Jon Snow stood upon the battlements of Winterfell, gazing north. Ghost sat at his side, silent as the grave, eyes keen. The torches sputtered in the howling wind, but Jon scarcely felt the cold. He wore a thick cloak of black fur, a crown of wrought iron resting lightly on his dark curls, though it felt heavier than any chain. Below him, the courtyard teemed with men readying themselves for departure. The fight would not stay behind walls forever. The wall needed reinforcing, and the White Walkers would not halt their march. He felt in his bones that the final confrontation drew near. He recalled Melisandre's words, that Azor Ahai would stand as a champion of the living. He glanced down at his sword, long claw, strapped to his hip. No flames danced along its edge, but it had proven itself against the walkers before. He recalled the moment at Hardhome when the White Walker's ice spear shattered upon his blade. Perhaps that was miracle enough. Perhaps he needed no blazing sword to fulfill his role. Behind him he heard footsteps. Sansa approached, wrapped in a cloak of her own. She joined him at the parapet, following his gaze. They stood in companionable silence. She placed a hand on his arm. "The men are ready," she said. "They will follow wherever you lead." He nodded, throat tight. "Then we'll go to the wall. And if the tales are true, the war beyond it." He exhaled slowly, watching his breath vanish in the wind. "We stand for the living. We stand because we must." Sansa squeezed his arm gently. "Our parents would be proud. The North is ours again, and we will protect it, no matter the cost." In the distance, the swirling white veiled the horizon. But beyond that veil, Jon sensed an approaching doom, a spectral legion of the dead, guided by pale figures of ice. The time for doubt was past. He was the king in the north, the man who had freed Winterfell from cruelty, who had rallied the wildlings and northern lords. Melisandre had named him Azor Ahai, and though he still wrestled with what that meant, he could not deny the tide of fate. As the wind whipped around them, Jon Snow placed a hand on the stone parapet and closed his eyes, recalling old words. "Night gathers, and now my watch begins." He had never truly left that watch, vow or no vow. The watch was for all the living. When his eyes opened, they burned with a fierce resolve. The world would learn if the Red Woman's prophecy was true. One way or another, the fires of war would test him, and the darkness would press in. Yet within him burned a spark that refused to be snuffed out. The new Azor Ahai, or just a bastard-born man with a sense of duty. Jon Snow took one last look at the swirling storm and whispered, "We are coming for you." Then he turned, cloak snapping behind him, and descended the steps. Sansa followed, and beneath the banners of the wolf, the north prepared to march. Winter was here, but in that winter burned a defiant flame, one that might just hold the dawn at bay for a little longer. If the gods were good, that flame would be enough. If not, well, Jon Snow would stand regardless, sword in hand, protecting those who could not protect themselves. Thus the tale began of the public declaration that Jon Snow was Azor Ahai reborn, and of the swirling storms of fate that followed. Whether prophecy shaped events or events shaped the prophecy is a question for bards and scholars. But in the north, where ice reigned and the dead walked, the line between legend and reality blurred. And so history turned a new page, guided by the choices of a handful of men and women who dared defy the gathering darkness, and by one man, a wolf in black, who carried the weight of a prophecy he never asked for, yet could not escape. Jon Snow stood upon the battlements of Winterfell with the wind howling across the snowy courtyard below. Though the cold numbed his cheeks and made his breath curl in pale clouds, he no longer felt the same chill he once did when he had been just another brother of the Night's Watch. Everything had changed since Melisandre proclaimed him Azor Ahai in front of the entire garrison at Castle Black. That prophecy, that unwelcome burden, had followed him like a shadow into Winterfell, and now the North looked to him not simply as a Stark by blood, nor as the newly declared king in the North, but as a champion touched by fire. He sometimes wondered which identity weighed on him more, the king's mantle or the name Azor Ahai. Either way, the responsibilities pressed upon him from every side, threatening to crush him if he faltered. Behind him, banners snapped in the wild breeze. The wolf's head of House Stark flew high, though many other sigils had been pinned to the walls as well. The Bear of Mormont, the Merman of Manderley, the Sunburst of House Karstark, whose loyalty teetered uneasily, and the Black Flayed Man of House Bolton, now torn, trampled, and set alight in a brazier's fire on the day Winterfell was retaken. The courtyard below was crowded with tents and makeshift huts, as the reclaimed stronghold was not large enough to house all who had come. Men from various northern houses, wildlings once called free folk, the ragged remnants of Stannis Baratheon's forces, and even wanderers and mercenaries drawn by rumor thronged the castle grounds. The North was mustering as it had not done in years. Winter was here, the White Walkers were stirring, and the prophecy of a champion had gathered a disparate host beneath the battered walls of Winterfell. Jon narrowed his eyes against the gusting snow. In the distance, he could make out a row of freshly dug graves, where the dead from the recent siege had been laid to rest. Among them were men who had once served the Boltons, men who had come to fight in Jon's name, even the occasional free folk who had traveled south to join the cause of the living. He saw no difference among them now. The dead needed no heraldry. They would find no rest unless their bodies were burned. But in the tradition of the North, some men had insisted on burying the bodies or leaving them with the old gods. Others argued for flame, so the dead would never rise again as whites. It was a tension that simmered every day, and Jon suspected it was only the first of many differences that might drive the living apart when they most needed to unite. A series of footsteps crunched in the snow behind him, and Jon turned to see Davos Seaworth, the Onion Knight, approach with a respectful dip of his head. Davos had made it clear that he served the realm before any single man, but ever since Melisandre's declaration that Jon was Azor Ahai and no longer Stannis, Davos had followed Jon with a blend of caution and loyalty. It was as if Davos believed in Jon's intentions far more than he believed in any Red God's will. "Snow's easing up a bit, Your Grace," Davos said quietly, glancing at the swirling flakes. "Is that your way of telling me I should come inside?" Jon asked, a hint of humor curling his lips. The wind continued to tear at his black cloak, and the furs at his shoulders were crusted with frost. "Even a man named Snow shouldn't court frostbite," Davos said, his face creasing in a wry smile. Then he grew somber. "We've heard from Eastwatch. They fear a larger force of whites will soon attack. The smaller parties that plagued them were only testing the waters. And reports from the Dreadfort indicate scattered Bolton men still roam the countryside, looting and ambushing supply lines." Jon exhaled slowly. The notion of splitting forces to handle both undead incursions and the last of the Bolton loyalists weighed heavily on him. "We can't afford to lose more men," he muttered. "But we can't let Eastwatch fall either. If it does, the coast is open to the White Walkers." Davos nodded. "Aye, and we've not heard much from the south lately. King's Landing seems too mired in its own troubles to send any real help. Even if they tried, winter storms would likely slow them for months." Jon shivered, not from cold, but from the memory of hard home. He imagined thousands of corpses crawling onto the beaches at Eastwatch, unstoppable. "Send a raven to the commanders at Eastwatch," he said. "Tell them we'll march to their aid once we've mustered enough forces here. We have to present a united front, even if it means leaving a skeleton garrison at Winterfell." "Do we have enough men to cover both tasks?" Davos asked carefully. "Defending the castle from the Bolton stragglers and riding to Eastwatch to stop the Whites?" Jon paused, uncertain. He had been declared king in the north, and that was a monumental title. But they lacked thousands of troops. They had no dragons as the Targaryens of old once commanded, and the cold was their constant foe. "We'll have to make do," he finally said. "We've no choice. Winterfell's important, but if the wall is breached, no fortress in the south is safe." Davos sighed. "Very well, Your Grace. I'll see it done." Jon nodded gratefully and walked with Davos back down the winding steps into the courtyard. Around them, the wind whipped hay and debris across the frozen ground. Guards posted at the inner gates stamped their feet and drew their cloaks tighter as Jon passed. He returned their salutes with a simple nod. The men watched him with something between respect and awe. Some of them still whispered that he was the chosen champion of the Red God, while others believed he was nothing more than a steadfast Stark valiantly reclaiming the North. Jon would have preferred they see him as a man with a duty. But rumor and prophecy had taken on a life of their own. He ducked under a low stone archway that led into one of the halls. Warmth wrapped around them instantly, the corridor lit by torches that hissed and spat. Jon's shoulders relaxed a fraction. As they passed deeper into Winterfell's labyrinthine corridors, they heard shouts echoing from the great hall ahead. Jon exchanged a concerned look with Davos, then quickened his pace. When they stepped inside, they found the wide space thrumming with tension. Men clustered in small knots, some wearing the sigil of the Bear House Mormont, others wearing House Glover's mailed fist, still others in motley attire that suggested little more than exile or wandering service. At the center of the hall, Lady Lyanna Mormont stood with her arms crossed, facing down a tall man wearing a half-torn Bolton sigil. He was broad-shouldered, with a disheveled beard, and had come as a messenger under a flag of truce, or so it seemed. Off to one side, Tormund Giantsbane and a few free folk glowered, hands near their weapons. Lyanna Mormont was only a girl of about 10 or 11, but she radiated authority and anger as she glared up at the messenger. Her voice cut through the echoing space. "You have the nerve to come here, wearing that on your chest, and speak of peace? Speak quickly, or I'll have you fed to the crows." Before the man could retort, Jon cleared his throat and stepped forward. The gathered men parted to let him through, and a hush fell. Tormund gave Jon a nod, silently warning him that this situation might spiral if not handled carefully. The messenger's gaze flicked to Jon. There was a spark of fear in his eyes, as if he half believed the rumors that Jon Snow had been reborn by fire. Jon spoke calmly. "I'm told you come under truce. Have you news from the remaining Bolton loyalists?" The man swallowed. "My name is Rory Woodwright, Your Grace, once steward of the Dreadfort. They sent me to negotiate. Lord Bolton is dead, his bastard is dead, but some men remain who do not wish to lose their lands. They propose that if you grant them clemency, they'll swear their fealty to House Stark." A stir ran through the hall. Jon was reminded, forcibly, of Theon Greyjoy's false surrender at Winterfell years past, of the treacheries that the Bolton name had come to represent. He glanced at Lady Mormont, who wore a scowl that would have made grown knights flinch, then he looked back at Rory. "Swear fealty? You fought us at Winterfell." Rory's face colored. "I never fought personally, Your Grace. I stayed at the Dreadfort running the kitchens and supply. I only deliver their message." Lyanna Mormont spoke fiercely. "They want to switch sides now that they've lost. That's no loyalty. That's cowardice." Jon raised a hand to calm her. "We have bigger concerns than punishing every man who bent the knee to Ramsay Bolton," he said. "Winter is here, and we face an inhuman enemy from beyond the wall. If these men truly wish to join us to unify the North under the Stark banner, I'll hear them out. But they'll need to come before me personally, disarm, and pledge their loyalty. If they refuse, we'll treat them as we do any enemy in open rebellion." Rory nodded, relief washing over his face. "Thank you, Your Grace. I'll deliver your words." "Do so quickly," Jon said. "I won't wait long." The man turned to leave, but Tormund's voice rumbled across the hall. "He should be watched. Maybe these Boltons planned something cunning." Jon nodded. "He goes under truce, but we'll send men to follow at a distance. See if he heads straight to the Dreadfort or attempts something else." At that, the tension eased. The clusters of men broke apart, muttering. Lyanna Mormont strode up to Jon and squared her shoulders. "We should flay the lot of them," she declared, a fierce fire in her eyes that seemed incongruous with her youth. Boltons flayed their enemies. Perhaps a taste of their own medicine would discourage further treachery. Jon's voice was measured. "We're not the Boltons. We'll not flay, nor break guest right, nor stoop to the cruelties they inflicted on others. If we're to unite the North, we have to show we're different." Lady Mormont sniffed but did not disagree overtly. She only said, "Very well, Your Grace. But if they betray us, you'll remember my words." "I will," Jon said. The group dispersed. Jon felt a headache forming at his temples. These sorts of negotiations, half battle, half diplomacy, had quickly become his daily routine since retaking Winterfell. He missed the simpler life at Castle Black, even with all its hardships. Duty had been more straightforward then: defend the wall, keep your brothers alive, remain neutral in the squabbles of the realm. Now neutrality was impossible. The realm's crisis had come to him, had swept him into a role as king and supposed champion of a red god he scarcely understood. Davos caught Jon's eye, and the king in the north nodded. They retreated to a smaller room off the side of the hall, a solar that had survived the fire set by Theon years before. Inside, the walls were hung with new tapestries of the dire wolf sigil, the floor strewn with old rushes. A single brazier provided warmth. Jon sank onto a wooden chair near the brazier, elbows on his knees, as Davos lingered by the door. Shortly thereafter, Sansa slipped inside, followed by Melisandre in her red robes. The sight of the red woman still put Jon on edge, but he had to acknowledge she had saved Rickon's life in the courtyard, had revived others from the brink of death, and seemed wholly devoted to the cause of defeating the Great Other. She had also publicly named Jon Azor Ahai. He did not entirely trust her, he was not sure he ever would, but he no longer doubted that her powers had some basis in reality. Sansa greeted Jon with a brief, sad smile, then settled in another chair. Despite the warmth, her hands shook slightly. "News from the west," she said without preamble. "House Dustin refuses our call, though they haven't openly joined any foes. They claim they're too underprovisioned to send men to fight the others. But rumor has it that Lady Barbary Dustin is simply waiting to see which way the wind blows." Jon let out a slow breath. "We need them. Every soldier could matter in the end." "She won't come unless she believes we'll win," Sansa said, bitterness in her voice. "She despised father, you recall. She lost her husband in Robert's rebellion, and she blames House Stark for never returning his bones." "What about the Umbers?" Jon asked, recalling that the Greyjohn's heirs had once been fiercely loyal to Robb but had fallen under Bolton influence. "Are they swayed?" "They're split," Sansa said. "Some of them remain at the last hearth, but those who marched with Ramsay either died in the siege or scattered. We've heard rumors that a few Umbers roam the countryside with a band of outlaws. It's chaos." Davos cleared his throat. "If I may, Your Grace, we need to show the North that Winterfell stands firm. If you ride off to Eastwatch too soon, they may fear we'll leave them defenseless." Melisandre spoke then, her voice low and resonant. "The living must unite, or they die. The lords who hesitate do so out of fear and doubt. Prove to them the true of our cause, and they will come." Jon gave her a level stare. "And how do you suggest we prove it?" Her red gold hair shimmered in the brazier's light. "By bringing them closer to the fires of truth. Show them a captured white, or let them witness the power of Valyrian steel against the undead. Sometimes men must see the darkness firsthand." Jon's memory flashed back to Harholm, the shriek of the wind, the stench of death, the churning surf that spat out half-eaten corpses. He did not want to risk capturing a white, but he couldn't deny that men might only believe if they faced the horror themselves. "We already have accounts from the wildlings, from Night's Watch brothers. The lords have read the letters." "Letters are easier to dismiss than nightmares made flesh," Melisandre replied. "Consider taking them north of the wall, or to Eastwatch, to see for themselves." Sansa looked aghast. "And risk them becoming casualties in the process?" Davos tapped a finger on his chin. "It might be the only way to convince the holdouts." Jon rose from his chair, pacing near the brazier. "We can't drag half the north beyond the wall. That would be madness in these conditions, and the White Walkers could spring an ambush. Let's not forget they command an army of the dead." A silence settled, broken only by the crackle of the coals. Then Melisandre lifted her chin. "There is another path. As Azor Ahai, you might reveal the power of Lightbringer, the sword that defeats darkness." Jon inhaled slowly. "This again." She spoke of forging Lightbringer, a legendary blade that burned with fire. He cast a glance at Longclaw, his Valyrian steel sword. Although it had saved him from a White Walker once, it showed no flames. "I won't sacrifice someone I love, as the stories claim Azor Ahai did. I won't kill innocents to awaken a sword." She bowed her head. "We needn't interpret the legend so literally. Perhaps the forging of Lightbringer is metaphorical. Perhaps you wield it already. The Lord of Light's plan rarely follows the old scripts precisely. All I know is that men crave signs. They want to see that you are more than just a mortal wearing a crown." Jon felt a flicker of frustration. "I never asked to be more than a mortal. All I want is to keep the realm safe." Sansa spoke gently. "The realm needs hope, Jon. Even false hope might rally them if it leads to real unity." He shut his eyes for a moment, pulling his thoughts together. "We'll consider a demonstration," he said grudgingly. But I'll not push some empty spectacle. For now, gather the lords. Let's hold another council. If men like Lady Dustin refuse to march, we need to know why, and we need to address their concerns. Davos nodded. I'll send out ravens. Jon looked at Melisandre. Can you send your red priests or red priestesses if there are others across the north urging unity? She inclined her head. I am but one priestess. But in White Harbor, there is a small gathering of worshippers. I can speak to them. Word may spread. Jon did not relish the idea of leaning on religious fervor, yet he saw no alternative. The north was too broken and weary, and they needed something that transcended old grudges. If men believed in Azor Ahai, if that meant they would come together, so be it. At least until the threat was dealt with. Sansa parted from the group, mentioning that she needed to check on Rickon and speak with the steward about food stores. Jon watched her go, feeling a pang of guilt. She had endured so much, from King's Landing to Ramsay's brutality, and now she had thrown herself into the mechanics of ruling. They hardly had a moment to share as siblings, battered by life's cruelties, but finally reunited. Everything was overshadowed by war. Davos stepped out next, leaving Jon alone with Melisandre by the brazier. The Red Woman regarded him with an almost sorrowful gaze. You doubt me, she said softly. I sense it. Jon turned the glowing coals with a long iron poker, not meeting her eyes. I doubt prophecies, he said. I doubt the idea that some god picked me to save the world. But I don't doubt what I've seen. The White Walkers are real. We need every advantage to stop them. If you can grant us that advantage, I'll accept your help. She reached out a hand, as if to rest it on his arm, but then seemed to think better of it. Prophecy is like a sword without a hilt. We bleed if we try to grasp it too tightly. But the flames reveal a future in which only one champion stands between darkness and dawn. My flames show me your face, again and again. I've tried reading them differently. They do not change. Jon's voice dropped to a murmur. I'm sorry for Stannis. Her lips curved into a sad twist. He was a good man, but the fires misled me or I misread them. Perhaps he played his role by leading me to you. Regardless, the living will rally to your banner, if you give them the sign they need. He said nothing more, and eventually she left him to his thoughts. He stared into the coals until they faded from red to dull gray, wondering if he stared too long, whether he might catch a glimpse of the future. He saw nothing but ash and darkness. The next morning, the sun rose weak and cold, barely illuminating the castle grounds. Snow drifted in lazy swirls. In the great hall, Jon had assembled a council of all the major lords and ladies who had answered his summons, plus a few free folk leaders and some southern knights who'd come north with Stannis. The tension in the air was palpable. They huddled around a long table, covered in maps and pinned notes. Torches flickered, adding a dancing glow to the gloom. Jon stood at the head of the table. Tormund Giantsbane loitered near the end, arms folded, face impassive. Lady Lyanna Mormont sat on a high-backed chair like a child queen. Lord Wyman Manderley of White Harbor, enormous in girth, stroked his thick white beard, occasionally sending sideways glances at Tormund. Robert Glover eyed the free folk warily, while Davos kept a neutral expression, ready to interject if tempers flared. Brienne of Tarth stood by Sansa's side, the tall warrior woman silent but watchful. Rickon was convalescing from his arrow wound, still too weak to attend. Jon placed a hand on the map of the north. You all know why we're here. Winterfell is secure for the moment, but Eastwatch reports undead activity. We must relieve them before they're overrun, or the White Walkers will have a foothold on the eastern coast. He tapped a point on the coastline. If they march inland, no castle will stand for long, especially if our forces are fractured. Lord Manderley cleared his throat. White Harbor stands with you, your grace. We'll muster what men we can spare, though we're still recovering from the wars. We've ships as well, in case you need to move along the coast. Good, Jon said. Stannis's men, those who remain, have pledged their steel. But we need more houses if we're to hold the wall and also watch for stragglers from the Boltons' side. The question is, do we make overtures to House Dustin, House Ryswell, and the others still sitting on the fence? Lady Lyanna spoke in her small but commanding voice. They can come to us if they want to stand with the living. If they don't, they're no better than enemies. Lord Glover pursed his lips. House Dustin's men are dangerous in the field and they hold the Barrowlands. They could cut off supply lines to or from White Harbor. Leaving them out of our alliance might be unwise. Jon nodded, acknowledging the point. We'll send another raven to Lady Barbary Dustin. Offer a parley. Let her come here, under safe conduct, to see the threat for herself. Several men shifted uneasily. The name Dustin was not well loved among the loyal Stark supporters. But none could deny that a strong show of unity was needed. Davos placed his finger on the map near Eastwatch. We'd also do well to consider how best to resupply Eastwatch. The seas are treacherous. But if House Manderly's fleet can navigate, we can send grain by sea. Else we'll have to haul it overland, which might be slower. Lord Manderly stroked his beard. We've some ships tough enough for the winter seas. I'll see to it, but it won't be quick. The storms near Skagos can be deadly. Tormund gave a short laugh. Storms and dead men. I'd rather face the storms. A chuckle rippled through the hall, tension easing slightly. But Sansa leaned forward, her gaze somber. Even if we resupply Eastwatch, we'll need men to defend it. The Night's Watch alone isn't enough. We only have a few hundred Black Brothers left in total. Some are at Castle Black, some at Shadow Tower, some at Eastwatch itself. Jon grimaced. He knew better than anyone how thin the Watch's ranks were. Recruitment had all but dried up since the War of the Five Kings began. If we can gather the strength of the North, we'll send a host to reinforce the wall. But I won't strip Winterfell of defenders completely. The Boltons' remnants might be plotting, and we can't discount the possibility of Ironborn raids on the coast. Brienne shifted, clearing her throat. Are we certain the Ironborn remain a threat? The last we heard, the Iron Islands were in turmoil. Euron Greyjoy took the throne from Balon, and Yara Greyjoy fled with Theon. Jon glanced at her. Chaos can be as dangerous as order. We can't be sure. The Ironborn might see an opportunity in a weakened North. Davos folded his arms. We must trust that if the Ironborn come, we'll handle them. Our immediate foe is the undead. Everything else is secondary. The council continued for hours, men discussing supply lines, fortifications, alliances, and the best routes to the wall. By the time they concluded, Jon felt as though he had aged years. He exchanged weary nods with the lords and ladies, then stepped aside as they began to filter out into the courtyard. Lady Lyanna Mormont approached him with her usual forthrightness. I'll not leave Bear Island undefended, but I'll send more men to Winterfell if you promise me one thing. Jon cocked an eyebrow. Name it. Let me fight. Let me come with them to the wall if it comes to that, she demanded, face stern. He hesitated. You're the lady of Bear Island, your people need you. She cut him off. And the North needs warriors with steady hearts. I can wield a sword as well as any of my cousins. If you expect me to send my men, expect me to join them. Jon had to admire her courage, but the thought of a child on the battlefield twisted his stomach. We'll speak on it if the time comes, Lady Mormont. Until then, prepare your houses as best you can. She gave a brusque nod and stalked off, no doubt to bark orders at grown men twice her size. Jon couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride in her, unusual though she was. Sansa lingered near the dais, eyeing Jon with a mixture of concern and admiration. You handle them well, she murmured. Father would have been proud. He shook his head. I'm just trying not to let everything unravel. She placed a hand on his arm, something gentle and familial that reminded him of childhood. You won't unravel anything. You've been the calm center of the storm since we retook Winterfell. People believe in you, Jon. I believe in you. That meant more to him than any title or prophecy. He covered her hand with his own. Thank you, he said softly. Then he saw Brienne waiting, a polite distance away. You needed something else, Sansa? She glanced at Brienne, who gave a small nod. We've received a letter addressed to both of us. From Peter Baelish. Jon stiffened. What does he want? Sansa's lip curled, recalling the manipulations she had suffered. He writes that he is in the Vale, rallying lords there, and that he may ride north soon to discuss an alliance. He offers help with conditions. Jon's memory of Baelish was not kind. The man had a slippery quality, all cunning and half-truths. What conditions? He wants to formalize a betrothal between House Stark and House Arryn, or so he implies. And perhaps recognition of his services to the crown. She shook her head. Who knows what else he truly wants? Brienne spoke, her tone level. I don't trust him. We owe him for helping us escape from the Vale, but his loyalties shift like leaves in the wind. Jon frowned. An alliance with the Vale could be critical. They have knights and fresh horses. But I won't sign away your future, Sansa. We won't be manipulated by him. She seemed relieved at his words. I don't intend to marry anyone just to secure men for our war, but we should at least see what he's offering. The Vale is the one region relatively untouched by these wars. Its knights might tip the balance against the White Walkers. He let out a slow exhale. Send him a reply. Invite him here to Winterfell. We'll negotiate from a position of strength. Sansa nodded, pressing her lips thin. I'll do it. But be wary, Jon. Peter Baelish is not a man who places faith in prophecy. He believes in power. He might exploit your new status for his own gain. Then he'll learn I'm not as pliable as he might hope, Jon said, though inwardly he braced himself for another web of intrigue. As the day wore on, ravens flew out from Winterfell, carrying messages to House Dustin, to the Vale, to Eastwatch, and across the north. The scribes wrote until their hands cramped, while stable boys tended to the flocks of ravens returning from other corners of the realm. Jon oversaw it all, the swirl of words and alliances, while an ache formed behind his eyes. This was a different kind of battle, one waged with parchment and promises instead of steel. When night fell, a biting cold descended as though the heart of winter itself pressed against the stones of Winterfell. Jon took a moment to stand before the old weirwood in the godwood, its red leaves stark against the snow. He pressed a hand to the trunk, remembering how he and his siblings once played here. Ghost padded behind him, silent as ever. The direwolf's breath fogged around his muzzle. Jon closed his eyes, hoping for some sign from the old gods, from his father's spirit, from anything that might guide him. The only sound was the creak of branches and the distant howling of the wind. It was almost enough to lull him into a strange peace, a sense that he was not alone. But then something shifted. He heard footsteps on fresh snow. He turned to see Bran standing there, or what once was Bran. The younger boy looked older, though still slight of frame, his hair longer and his eyes ancient. Jon's breath caught. He had not seen Bran since before the wars tore the Stark family apart. He had heard only rumors that Bran had gone beyond the wall, that he had died in some mishap or become some kind of magical green seer. He had scarcely believed any of it. Now here Bran stood, leaning against the trunk of another tree. Bran, Jon whispered, voice trembling with emotion. Bran offered a small smile. Hello, Jon. His voice carried an odd quality, as though he spoke from a place far away. I came back to Winterfell. I had to see you. Jon crossed the godwood in a few strides, taking Bran's shoulders carefully, as though uncertain he were real. The younger boy felt solid enough, even if he wore a thick cloak of fur and looked drawn. You're alive. How? What happened? Bran glanced at the carved face of the weirwood, its red eyes seeming to watch them both. It's a long story. I traveled beyond the wall, met the three-eyed raven, learned the old secrets. I can see things now, visions of the past, sometimes of the future. His voice grew quieter. I knew I had to return. Because you need me. Jon tried to steady his racing heart. We do need you. We need every Stark. Sansa and Rickon are here, Arya is, we're not sure, but we have hope. He studied Bran's eyes and saw a depth there that felt older than any child's. What did you learn exactly? Bran hesitated, then glanced toward Ghost, who stood alert, ears perked. You're the king in the north now, or so the ravens say. But you're something more, aren't you? The Red Priestess calls you Azor Ahai. Jon grimaced. She does, but I never asked for that. I'm not even sure it's true. Bran shook his head slowly. There is truth in it, though. I've seen glimpses through the Weirwood network. You're unique, Jon. Your parentage. Jon stiffened. You know my parentage? I was told I'm Eddard Stark's bastard. Bran's expression softened. Father was an honorable man. He raised you as his own son. But your mother was Lyanna Stark. And your father was Rhaegar Targaryen. A shockwave ran through Jon. His grip on Bran's shoulders tightened. That can't be. It is, Bran said gently. I've seen it in the past. At the Tower of Joy. Father promised your mother he would protect you. He kept that promise, even if it meant letting the realm believe you were his bastard. Jon stared, a maelstrom of emotions tearing him apart inside. Disbelief, anger, grief, awe. If Lyanna Stark was truly his mother, that meant Ned Stark was his uncle, not his father. If Rhaegar Targaryen was his father, that meant his blood carried the line of the dragon. This is madness, he whispered. Why tell me now? Because it matters, Bran said. You have the blood of the dragon in your veins and the blood of the wolf. Melisandre's prophecy might stem from that union. And if the Targaryen line was thought extinguished, you are proof it isn't. Jon felt as though the ground shifted beneath his feet. Every word he'd said that day about uniting the North, about forging alliances, took on a new significance. If the realm discovered he had a claim not only to the North but to the Iron Throne, he did not want that. He wanted no throne at all, only to defend the living. Yet men would see him differently. Some would flock to him, others would call him a usurper or a pretender. Ghost let out a low growl as if sensing Jon's turmoil. Jon forced his breathing steady. Bran, this secret could tear the realm apart. You know that. Bran nodded. I know. But I had to tell you. You deserve the truth. I came back because I know what's coming. The Night King is marching. The magic that holds back the dead is weakening. We must fight together. And you, Bran looked at him with an unsettling calm. You're meant to lead that fight. Jon remembered Melisandre's fervent declarations, the old stories of Azor Ahai's lineage, rumored to be tied to dragon's blood. How did you get here safely? Jon asked, trying to anchor himself in practicalities. Travel through the winter is perilous. I had help, Bran said vaguely. Friends beyond the wall guided me. Benjen Stark, our uncle. He saved me from the Whites more than once. I rode south with Mira Reed's help and eventually I found a group of free folk who escorted me through the snow to Winterfell's gates. Jon's mind reeled. Uncle Benjen was alive? He recalled the stories from his early days in the Watch. Benjen had vanished on a ranging. We have to find him if he's still alive. Bran's gaze flickered with sorrow. He can't pass the wall's magic. He's changed. Half dead, half alive. He remains behind, fighting in his own way. Jon exhaled a shuddering breath. There's too much to take in. But come inside. We'll get you warm, get you fed, and we'll explain everything to Sansa and Rickon. They'll be overjoyed to see you. Bran nodded, and together they made their way out of the Godwood, Ghost trailing them. Once inside the keep, warmth and torchlight replaced the austere cold. Servants rushed to fetch cloaks and hot broth for Bran, while Sansa, informed of his arrival, came running into the corridor. She halted, tears already welling in her eyes, and then wrapped her younger brother in a fierce embrace. Bran returned it with a gentle pat on her back, as though he were the elder sibling now. Bran, she whispered, voice trembling. We feared you were gone. I'm here, Bran said softly. I'm sorry it took so long. She pulled back, looking him over, noticing the changes in his demeanor. You've grown, she said with a watery smile. But you look so tired. I have a lot to tell you, Bran replied. Where's Rickon? Resting, Sansa said. He was wounded, but he's healing. He'll be so happy. Jon watched the siblings embrace, a swirl of relief in his own chest. The Starks, scattered like leaves, were slowly finding their way home. He longed for Arya too, hoping she might reappear. The realm needed the Stark family's unity, even if the name Stark only half applied to him now. They settled Bran by a fire in one of the side chambers, where a maester brought bandages for minor frostbite and bruises. Bran ate slowly from a steaming bowl of stew, occasionally wincing. His legs were as wasted as Jon recalled them. He would never walk on his own again, but something about his posture suggested he saw far more than others did while standing. Sansa and Jon waited, letting him recover. After a time, Bran spoke again. Jon, I need you to know I'm not going to proclaim your lineage to every lord and lady. I understand the danger. But you should be aware of it. Because it's part of who you are and it might be tied to your destiny. Jon nodded. Thank you. I'll decide who else needs to know. Sansa looked between them, uncertain. What lineage? Jon exchanged a glance with Bran, exhaling heavily. I'll explain later, Sansa. But for now, trust that it changes nothing about our loyalty to each other. She looked unconvinced but accepted his words. We can talk in private. Right now, let's just be thankful Bran is here. Bran gave her a small nod and then his gaze turned inward as though he were seeing things beyond the walls of Winterfell. The storm is coming fast, he murmured. We don't have much time. Jon leaned closer. What did you see? The Whites are gathering near the frozen shore, Bran said, eyes distant. The White Walkers are leading them. They're testing Eastwatch as you said, but soon they'll come in force. They have monstrous things among them, creatures I haven't seen before. Corpses of giants, ice spiders bigger than hounds. The Watchers at Eastwatch can't hold them back forever. Fear prickled over Jon's skin. If the undead truly had giant wights and monstrous beasts, the defenders at Eastwatch would stand little chance unless reinforced. We'll march as soon as we can, Jon said grimly. But we need to gather more forces or we'll only add to the body count. They can't be allowed to break through, Bran said, voice hollow. The moment they cross the wall in large numbers, all the prophecies and alliances in the world won't save us. Jon reached out and gripped Bran's arm, as if to anchor them both in the present. We'll do what we must. Later that night, Jon and Sansa met alone in the privacy of Ned Stark's former solar. The same room where Ned once read letters and made decisions about the North. A cold wind whistled outside, and a brazier glowed near the wall, offering scant warmth. Jon explained to Sansa what Bran had revealed about his parentage. She listened with widening eyes, a hand pressed to her mouth. Rhaegar Targaryen, she whispered. So, you have a stronger claim to the Iron Throne than almost anyone, if that's true. But you've been a Stark all our lives. It doesn't feel real. Jon's jaw tightened. It doesn't feel real to me either. But it explains some things. My features, the rumors father endured about my mother. He always refused to speak of her. Sansa paced, her skirts swishing over the stone floor. Does this mean you'll try to claim the throne? The Targaryens are all but gone. Daenerys Targaryen is said to be across the sea with dragons, or so the rumors go. If she ever lands in Westeros. Jon ran a hand through his hair. I don't want any throne, Sansa. I only want to defend the living. The truth of my birth might help explain Melisandre's prophecy. Though, Azor Ahai, the prince that was promised. Maybe it was never about Stannis. Maybe it's about a union of ice and fire. A Stark and a Targaryen. Her gaze flicked toward the shuttered window. The North may not welcome news of Targaryen blood, especially after what the Mad King did, after the wars. But they do love Ned Stark's memory. You might lose half your supporters if you reveal this. Jon nodded. So we keep it quiet for now. Only we and Bran know. Perhaps we can trust Davos. He's loyal. But the rest? Let them see me as a Stark, for that's how I was raised. Sansa's expression was pensive. And if Daenerys Targaryen arrives, or if another Targaryen faction emerges, I'll cross that bridge when I must, Jon said, sounding weary. For now, we have bigger problems in the north. If we don't stop the White Walkers, it doesn't matter who sits any throne. She nodded, understanding etched into her features. We'll keep your secret. But if the day comes when you must reveal it, promise me you won't do it alone. You have a family, no matter what your bloodline says. His throat tightened at her words. Thank you, he said softly. They spoke of other matters then. The possible arrival of Petyr Baelish, the negotiations with hesitant lords, the growing rumors of Azor Ahai. Sansa recounted that some men claimed to have seen Jon wreathed in flame during the siege, though he had carried no torch. Jon grimaced, recalling only the biting cold and the grit of battle. Superstitions spread faster than ravens, it seemed. If such rumors helped unify the North, perhaps they weren't entirely unwelcome. Yet Jon felt uneasy about letting men believe him some divine figure. As days bled into weeks, Winterfell bustled with frantic activity. Reinforcements trickled in from loyal houses, more Mormont spearmen, Tallheart archers, Serwyn swordsmen. A battered contingent of Umbers arrived, the survivors of Ramsay's forced levies, eager to redeem themselves under the Stark banner. Jon and Sansa welcomed them carefully, ensuring they were genuine in their submission. The new arrivals froze at first sight of the free folk, then slowly realized these were allies, not raiders. Tormund joked that the Kneelers needed to learn who the real enemy was. Meanwhile, word came that Lady Barbary Dustin had refused the invitation to parley at Winterfell. She remained secluded in Barrowdon. Jon decided it was not worth risking a forced march there. Let her sit in her gloom if she wished. If the others came, Barrowdon would be as doomed as any castle. Jon directed scouts to ride out near the Dreadfort, keeping watch on Bolton stragglers. They discovered that some had indeed regrouped under a minor Bolton cousin who claimed to be the rightful warden of the North. A handful of skirmishes followed, leading to small casualties on both sides. Jon refrained from launching a full assault, focusing instead on gathering strength for the journey to Eastwatch. Then, one frigid morning, ravens arrived from the Vale. Petyr Baelish was on his way north, accompanied by a sizable force of knights. Some men breathed sighs of relief. Knights of the Vale were known for their discipline and martial skill, but others muttered distrust. Sansa grew tense as the day of his arrival drew near. Brienne stayed by her side constantly, prepared for any sign of betrayal. On the appointed day, the gates of Winterfell opened to admit a column of Vale riders. Their horses snorted white plumes in the cold, and their armor gleamed well-maintained despite the harsh conditions. Petyr Baelish himself rode at the front, wearing a rich cloak of dark velvet. His mockingbird sigil was discreetly displayed on a small pin, overshadowed by the larger banner of House Arryn, a falcon on a sky-blue field. Alongside him rode young Lord Robin Arryn, bundled in furs, looking pale and thin, racked by the occasional cough. Jon stood in the courtyard with Sansa at his side, flanked by Davos, Tormund, and a handful of northern lords. Baelish dismounted gracefully, casting his sly gaze over the crowd. He bowed with exaggerated courtesy. "Your Grace, King in the North," he said, addressing Jon. "And my Lady Sansa." It warms my heart to see Winterfell thriving. Sansa's expression was carefully controlled, though her dislike for him showed in the tightness of her mouth. Littlefinger, she said in a clipped tone. You come a long way in the dead of winter. He offered a small, seemingly earnest smile. For family, my lady. For the sake of the realm. The Vale stands ready to assist. Jon stepped forward, measuring the man. You've brought a substantial force. We appreciate it if you truly mean to help us fight the undead. Baelish spread his hands. I do indeed. The Knights of the Vale have been kept idle too long. We come to preserve the living. Of course, I trust we'll discuss some arrangements for the future. The Vale cannot march north without expectation of fair treatment. Jon gestured to the great hall. We'll speak inside where it's warmer. Baelish nodded, turning to help the young Lord Aaron from his horse. The boy coughed, glancing nervously at the free folk, then at the array of northern soldiers. Sansa stepped forward to greet him with the courtesy expected of a noblewoman, which seemed to settle him somewhat. With formalities done, they moved indoors, leaving the Knights of the Vale to stable their horses and set up quarters in the courtyards. In the great hall, the new arrivals warmed themselves by the fire. Jon kept the conversation brisk. He recounted the threat of the White Walkers, the need to march to Eastwatch, and the unity required to defend the realm. Baelish listened, fingers steepled. Then he inquired about the political situation in King's Landing, whether there might be a future in which Jon, acknowledged as king in the north, entered into a formal alliance with the Iron Throne. Jon sidestepped that matter. Eventually, the talk shifted to the specifics of Vale support. Baelish proposed that the Vale Knights join with the northern host in an expedition to Eastwatch in return for certain trade privileges once the war was done. Also, he hinted that he would like Sansa to formalize a union with House Aaron, possibly through betrothal, though he couched it in flowery language about uniting the great houses. Sansa's face remained a mask. Jon firmly redirected Baelish to the immediate crisis, reminding him that no one would trade or wed if the White Walkers destroyed the world of men. They negotiated late into the night. Lord Robin Arryn grew restless, eventually excusing himself to find more comfortable quarters. Sansa departed too, leaving Jon and Davos to continue talks with Baelish. By the time they concluded, a provisional agreement was reached. The Vale Knights would join the campaign north, and in return, the Vale would receive favorable trade and a voice in any future northern councils. As for marriage alliances, Jon promised only to revisit the subject if the war was won. Baelish's lips twitched, but he accepted with apparent graciousness, as if he had more cards to play. Over the following days, the Vale Knights integrated somewhat uneasily into the forces gathered at Winterfell. Their discipline and fine armaments impressed many of the northern lords who had lost so much in the recent wars. Yet Tormund sneered openly at their silk shirts, preferring the rough-and-ready ferocity of the free folk. Despite the friction, it was clear the combined host was growing formidable. Perhaps formidable enough to challenge an army of the dead, though Jon suspected numbers mattered less against whites, who neither felt fear nor fatigue. All the while, Bran sat in quiet corners, drifting between the present and his visions. Sometimes he gave warnings, glimpses of scouts in the far north, or subtle changes in the weather. Other times he seemed lost in old memories not his own. Sansa worried for him, but he reassured her he was only doing what he must to help. Then came a day when a raven arrived from Castle Black, bearing a frantic message. The undead had gathered in great numbers near the Shivering Sea, threatening to cut off Eastwatch from any outside support. The writer of the message pleaded for immediate reinforcement, warning that time was short. Jon convened a war council that very evening, the hall filled with the hushed tension of men facing an unthinkable enemy. He spread a map on a trestle table and pointed to Eastwatch by the sea, the easternmost stronghold of the Night's Watch. The letter says the whites have assembled here at the coastline. If they break through, they can come around the wall or possibly even find a weak point. We have to move. Davos rubbed his jaw. We can bring men by land, but that journey will take weeks through deep snow. The sea route might be quicker if the ice hasn't locked the coast yet. Lord Manderley looked grim. Some of my ships can brave the waters, but not all. We can ferry perhaps a few thousand men before the storms become too fierce. Tormund cracked his knuckles. We'll need every fighter we can spare, or it's a fool's errand. Sansa shot Jon a worried look. If you take too many, Winterfell might be vulnerable. Jon pressed his hands against the table, leaning forward. We can't defend Winterfell if the White Walkers get past the wall. Everything will fall. We have to bring a force large enough to hold Eastwatch. The Watch is depending on us. Bran, have you seen anything else in your visions? Bran, seated near the end of the table, nodded slightly. They have giants, like I said. And the White Walkers themselves lead from behind. They're patient. They let the dead do the brunt of the fighting. The storms follow them, giving them cover. Baelish interjected in his smooth tone. Perhaps a smaller, elite force could slip into Eastwatch and strike at the White Walkers directly, decapitating their leadership. Isn't that what you did at Harhome, Jon? You faced a White Walker with Valyrian steel. Jon recalled that moment. He remembered the shock on the Walker's face when Longclaw parried its ice spear, shattering it. Killing a handful of White Walkers might slow them, but there are more. The Night King is the real threat. We can't take him down so easily. Bran's eyes flickered with unknown sights. He's there, near Eastwatch, or he will be soon. He knows about the swords that can kill his kind. He won't come within your reach, not willingly. Davos tapped the table. If we can't kill them all at once, maybe we can hold the line until we find a way. Or wait for the rumored dragons across the sea if they're real. That garnered some skeptical looks, but Jon considered the rumor. Daenerys Targaryen supposedly had 3 dragons. How that could shift the balance against an army of the dead was anyone's guess, but dragons had once ended the long night. So the legend said. We focus on the immediate threat, Jon said. Lord Manderley, prepare as many ships as possible. We'll sail from White Harbor with a force that includes the Vale Knights, the Free Folk, and enough Northerners to stand a chance. The rest will march overland with the supplies. We might arrive in 2 separate waves. Baelish murmured approval. A bold plan, your grace. Tormund grunted. Bold or foolish, we'll see. But count me in for the ships. My free folk know how to handle rough water. Sansa rose to stand at Jon's side. Then it settled. We gather by the moorings at White Harbor in a fortnight. That's barely enough time, but we have no choice. Jon's gaze swept the table. Men's faces were drawn but resolved. Yes. May the gods old and new protect us. After the council dispersed, Jon lingered behind, staring at the map. The flickering torches made the lines of the coast dance in shadows. He thought of Harhome again, of the thousands of wildlings who had perished and risen. He thought of the possibility that if Eastwatch fell, so would the entire north. They had no illusions about the scale of the fight. Even with the Vale Knights, they were outnumbered by the undead. Yet Azor Ahai's prophecy spoke of a champion who would turn the tide. He tried to imagine what that would look like in reality. Then he remembered his father, no, his Uncle Ned, and how the man had always taught him about duty and honor. Azor Ahai or not, he was a Stark in spirit. He would do his duty. With that in mind, he gathered the map, snuffed out the torches, and went to speak with Sansa about the logistics of the journey, the distribution of men, and who would govern Winterfell in their absence. Sansa insisted she would remain behind to keep Winterfell secure and to look after Rickon and Bran. She pointed out that if the worst happened at Eastwatch, someone must rally the north to continue the fight. Jon wanted her close, but he couldn't deny her logic. Lady Lyanna Mormont, too, would stay. Bear Island needed her leadership, and though she had demanded a chance to fight, Jon convinced her that more fights would come. She yielded only reluctantly. Thus, the departure was set. Over the following 2 weeks, White Harbor bustled as ships were prepared and loaded with supplies, dried fish, salted pork, grains, and barrels of fresh water. The Vale Knights erected pavilions along the shoreline, while the free folk scouted the area, hunting game in the nearby forests. The city's inhabitants watched wide-eyed as these improbable allies converged. Lord Wyman Manderley found himself inundated with logistical challenges, from feed for horses to space for archers. Davos Seaworth proved invaluable in organizing the loadouts, drawing on his experience as a smuggler and a naval commander of sorts. Jon spent hours each day on the docks, ensuring that men and materials were distributed properly. Tormund teased him about shifting cargo like a washerwoman, but Jon only grunted and continued his tasks. At times, he felt the eyes of the men upon him. Some looked at him with reverence, murmuring about Azor Ahai. Others were merely curious. Was this the bastard of Winterfell who rose to become king in the north? And what feats would he accomplish against the dead? The day before the fleet was set to sail, a hush fell over the camp as Melisandre arrived. She had traveled from Winterfell separately, choosing to speak with the lords in various waypoints along the road. Rumors swirled that she had performed strange rites in the villages, urging men to pray to Lawler for deliverance. Her success was modest. The north remained staunch in its old gods, but a few scattered hearts were won. When she stepped onto the docks at White Harbor, her red robes stood out starkly against the gray sky and choppy sea. She went to Jon, inclining her head. "It's nearly time," she said softly. "The flames show me a great battle ahead on ice-laden shores. Blood in the snow, fire in the sky. Be wary, but be bold." Jon nodded, gazing at the uneasy waters. "We'll do our best." He hesitated, then asked, "Any further visions of the White Walkers?" She closed her eyes briefly. "I see them in number beyond counting. But I see your sword as well. It shines. Remember, courage can be its own fire." He had heard enough riddles. "We sail at dawn. Pray for us if you can." She gave him a grave smile and drifted away toward her own quarters. Jon returned to the final preparations. That night, he tried to sleep, but found himself awake, listening to the creaking of ships at their moorings, the wind moaning through the rigging, and the occasional cry of a distant gull. He stepped out onto the deck of the flagship he would command, a sturdy Manderley vessel named the Maiden's Truth. The deck was slick with sea spray, and the sky overhead was a tapestry of swirling gray clouds. He felt a presence behind him. Turning, he saw Davos. "Can't sleep either, can you?" Jon asked wryly. Davos shook his head. "Too many ghosts, too many memories of storms and battles. I thought I'd left the sea behind, but here I am again." Jon rested an arm on the rail, peering at the dark waters. "Better seas than the undead." "Aye," Davos agreed, though neither man truly believed the ocean would be easier than the enemy they faced. Dawn brought a biting wind that snapped at sails and threatened to break the mooring lines. Nonetheless, the expedition pushed forward. Lord Manderley's men navigated the harbor expertly, guiding the ships out into the open sea. The sky hung low, ominous, as if brooding on the battle to come. On the Maiden's Truth, Jon stood near the prow with Tormund, watching the coastline shrink behind them, the scattered watchfires of White Harbor fading in the distance. The Vale Knights occupied two other large vessels, their horses housed in the holds below, stamping nervously. Cargo ships loaded with provisions followed in a line, guarded by smaller escort vessels. The plan was to sail north along the coast, hugging the shoreline until they reached Eastwatch, hoping the ice had not made the route impassable. Meanwhile, a smaller force under the command of a northern lord named Harrion Reed, a cousin to the Crannogmen though not from the main line, would march overland to arrive several days later if the weather cooperated. Jon studied the horizon with narrowed eyes. "We need calm seas, or as calm as can be, but I suspect we won't get them." Tormund spat into the water. "Calm seas? Not in this storm of an age. But we'll handle it. Your fancy knights might get sick, though." As the ships progressed, the wind built into a frigid gale. Waves battered the hulls, spraying freezing mist over the decks. Some men, unused to sea travel, clung to the rails, retching. Jon's own stomach churned, but he managed to keep his composure. Days blurred into a gray slog of wind, cold, and cramped conditions. Occasionally, they spotted the coastline, a ridge of icy cliffs, dark forests, the occasional settlement or watchtower. Most places seemed deserted, the inhabitants presumably fled south or locked inside for the winter. After nearly a week at sea, the fleet rounded a jagged cape. A lookout shouted that they were near Eastwatch. Men rushed to the rails, squinting through the storm to catch the first glimpse of the fortress. Soon, Jon saw it too, a tall section of the wall looming in the distance where it met the sea and the dark shape of the castle's towers at its base. But he also saw something else that made his heart seize, a mass of figures clustered on the shoreline north of Eastwatch, creeping along the ice floes, a swarming tide of the dead. Even from this distance, it was clear the fortress was under siege. The watchtowers showed faint lights, arrows or catapult fire occasionally streaking into the gloom. The whites surged against the walls or attempted to move along the frozen shore toward the main gates. The number of undead stretched farther than Jon could comfortably estimate. He saw ice-laden shapes lurching in the shallows, some already partly frozen but still moving. Tormund's face hardened. "We've come just in time, or maybe too late." Jon turned to the men. "Lower the longboats. We can't sail straight into the horde, but we can land south of Eastwatch and make our way on foot to reinforce the garrison." The crew scrambled to comply, dropping small boats over the side, loading them with archers and swordsmen. The Vale Knights donned their armor, fumbling in the cramped conditions, some looking pale. Davos orchestrated the disembarkation with clipped orders, his voice rising over the howling wind. Melisandre stood on the deck, robes buffeted, her red hair streaming behind her, praying under her breath. Jon strapped on his sword belt, adjusting long claw at his side, and took a deep breath. He glanced at Tormund. "Ready?" Tormund bared his teeth in a wolf-like grin. "My people have always said your father's house was big and fancy, but you're as fierce as any free folk. Let's show them how the living fight." They climbed down into a longboat with a group of seasoned warriors, men from the north and free folk alike. The freezing spray lashed their faces as they rowed toward the shore. All around them, other longboats did the same. As they approached, they could hear the clamor of battle from Eastwatch's walls, faint shouting, the crack of ice, eerie shrieks that must have come from the whites. Fires glimmered along the battlements, likely the watch using flaming arrows. Jon's boat ground onto the pebbly shore. He leapt out, boots sinking in a slurry of ice and sand, and hauled it farther up so the others could disembark. The wind cut through him, but adrenaline kept him warm enough. He scanned the terrain. They had landed slightly south of Eastwatch, where the White Knife estuary met the Shivering Sea. Snow blew across drifts, obscuring gullies and rocks. The fortress rose to the north, besieged on its seaward side by the Whites. With rapid coordination, the new arrivals formed ranks, Vale Knights in front with lances and heavy shields, Free Folk archers behind them. Davos took a smaller contingent to protect the ships and watch for flank attacks. Jon seized a moment to raise his voice. "We stand for the living. Protect each other and press onto Eastwatch's gates." A ragged cheer met his words. Then they began marching along the shoreline toward the fortress. At first, they encountered only scattered Whites that had strayed from the main mass. Tormund's axe and the knights' lances dealt with those quickly enough. Valyrian steel was not needed to kill the simple undead foot soldiers, only fire, steel, or brute force that crushed them to pieces. But as they neared the castle's flank, the full sight of the horde came into view, an endless tide stretching across the frozen shallows. Ghost padded at Jon's side, ears flattened, hackles raised. The direwolf snarled, and Jon could see the reflection of the Whites in Ghost's red eyes. He felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. They had faced something like this at Harhome, but not at this scale. It was as if the dead from a dozen graveyards had assembled. Some wore remnants of armor or cloaks. Others were half-skeleton, bits of flesh and ice clinging to them. The White Walkers themselves were not immediately visible, but their presence was felt in the swirling gusts and the unnaturally cold gust of wind that battered the living. A horn blast sounded from Eastwatch's walls, echoing over the battlefield. Then, with a collective moan, a portion of the undead turned toward the newly arrived reinforcements. Jon heard Tormund's hiss, "Here they come." The first wave of Whites broke away, scuttling and stumbling across the snow, some crawling on all fours. A Vale Knight let out a shout to brace spears. When the Whites reached them, the crash of bodies was sickening. The living battered them back with shields and thrust steel points through decaying flesh. However, the Whites did not relent. They crawled over their own fallen, snapping jaws and swinging bony limbs. The line of knights almost buckled, but Tormund roared and flung himself into the fray, hacking with his axe, severing heads and limbs. Jon joined in, Longclaw flashing in arcs that severed the rotted torsos of two Whites. They fell, still twitching, until the knights finished them with stabs. Another wave came, and another. Arrows from the Free Folk whistled overhead, igniting some of the Whites, but the creatures pressed forward. Melisandre stood amid a group of men, chanting in her strange tongue, hands glowing with a flicker of flame. Now and then she cast a small fire spell that set pockets of Whites ablaze. Still, they kept coming. Jon realized that the main horde had yet to even shift. This was only the portion that had noticed them. They were outnumbered. He bellowed, "Press toward the gate. We have to get inside Eastwatch's walls." The living soldiers struggled forward, step by step, cutting and burning Whites as they went. The stench of rot was overpowering. The clamor of steel and the screams of men and horses merged into a cacophony. Jon's arms burned from the constant swings of Longclaw. His heart pounded so loudly it felt like war drums in his ears. Now and again he glimpsed a Vale Knight taken down by a surge of the dead. The man vanished in a scrum of clawing hands, and a moment later, his shriek cut off. Closer to the castle, the defenders atop the walls cheered at seeing relief arrive. They hurled flaming pots and shot bolts into the mass of Whites below, providing covering fire. Under that protective bombardment, Jon and his vanguard finally reached the heavy gates. The portcullis groaned, raised by the watchers inside, allowing the battered reinforcements to pour through. Tormund dragged two wounded men over the threshold, and they collapsed onto the courtyard's icy ground. Jon stumbled after them, chest heaving, looking back to see more stragglers struggling to break free from the Whites. A final surge of archers on the battlements loosed flaming arrows, momentarily driving the undead back. Then the gates slammed shut, locking out the horde. Shouts of "Heave!" went up as men dropped heavy beams to reinforce the doors. The courtyard was a scene of chaos. Wounded men moaning, horses frothing at the mouth in terror, black brothers with half-frozen beards rushing about, trying to organize triage. Jon spotted Cotter Pike, the commander of Eastwatch, storming toward him, face red from cold and fury. "About bloody time you got here," Pike growled. "We've been holding them off for days." A chunk of the sea froze, letting the Whites walk across the ice. The storms are savage, and we can't sail away. We came as quickly as we could, Jon panted. He looked around, seeing that Eastwatch was nearly overrun. The outer fortifications were crumbling in places, the walls lined with makeshift barricades. How many do you still have? Pike spat. Less than 100 black brothers. We had some volunteer lords from the surrounding areas, but half are dead. The whites encircle us from the east and north. We can't hold another major push, not without reinforcements. The rest of your men, how many more? Jon turned, gesturing to the ramparts. They're still landing. We have a fleet, several thousand, maybe, if they can all get ashore. Pike's eyes widened in relief. We might have a chance then. The problem is the White Walkers keep stirring up storms. Morale is shot, and the men are half frozen. Jon frowned. We'll set up a command post, reorganize. We can't let them break the wall here. While Pike barked orders at his own men, Jon helped Tormund carry the injured to a more sheltered spot behind a half-toppled tower. Melisandre came too, checking them for any sign of the Whites' contagion or frostbite so severe it meant amputation. The smell of blood and charred flesh thickened the air. The heavy thunder of more men arriving at the gates drew Jon's attention. He glimpsed Vale banners and Manderly sigils. Good, the rest of the landing force was making it through. They had to secure the perimeter. Then, as if to confirm the worst, a sentinel's horn sounded thrice. A sign of White Walkers. Jon tensed, scanning the courtyard for the threat. A swirl of icy wind tore through the open spaces above the walls. Several black brothers cried out, pointing. Over the parapet, Jon saw a tall figure perched on a drift of ice. Pale skin, armor of swirling frost, eyes glowing a cold, inhuman blue. A White Walker. It raised a spear of ice, and the air seemed to crackle with lethal intent. Jon ran toward the ramparts, longclaw in hand. He remembered Harhome, how a single walker could devastate normal steel, how only Valyrian steel or dragoglass could truly stand against them. Tormund bellowed a war cry, scrambling up the steps behind him, but Tormund's axe was mere steel, no match for the walker's magic. The White Walker leapt down onto the rampart walkway, moving with unearthly grace. A black brother tried to slash it with a sword, the sword shattered in a spray of frozen shards. The walker impaled the man with an ice blade, leaving him to crumple, blood staining the snow. Jon sprinted the last few yards, raising Longclaw in both hands. He met the walker's gaze, a chill like death incarnate. They clashed. Longclaw met the ice blade in a shower of sparks and shards, neither weapon breaking. The walker hissed, twisting its spear with supernatural strength, forcing Jon back a step. Jon gritted his teeth, channeling all his rage and fear into a counterthrust. Sparks flew again, and the walker recoiled as if stung. Its eyes flicked over Jon with something like recognition or anger. Somewhere behind him, Tormund yelled, "Jon, kill the damn thing." But the walker moved swiftly, swinging the ice spear in a broad arc. Jon barely ducked, feeling the razor wind pass overhead. He slashed upward, catching the walker's arm. A faint crackle and a hiss of cold mist erupted. The walker staggered, the wound smoking with ephemeral frost. For an instant, Jon saw the reflection of flame in Longclaw's steel, though no actual fire burned on its blade. Then he lunged again, driving the point at the walker's chest. It tried to parry, but Jon twisted past the spear and thrust home. The walker let out a shriek like ice fracturing across a frozen lake. Its form splintered, shards of frost and swirling snow collapsing inward. In the span of a heartbeat, it was gone, leaving only glittering fragments that dissolved into the wind. Cheers erupted from the men on the ramparts. Jon stood there, panting, heart-hammering, ghostly plumes of breath swirling around him. Tormund clapped him on the back. "You did it, you bloody bastard," Tormund growled. Jon nodded, swallowing hard. "One down," he said hoarsely, "and thousands to go." He looked beyond the walls at the swarm of whites lurching just out of arrow range, as if waiting for orders. The White Walker he'd slain had been a scout, testing their defenses yet again. The Night King himself was nowhere to be seen. Jon wondered if that figure was out there, watching. Davos and other men began to filter onto the ramparts, surveying the outcome. At the sight of the shattered remains of the walker, men murmured, half in awe, half in fear. Melisandre arrived in time to see the last of the icy shards vanish. She studied Jon with an intent gaze. He wanted to look away. He knew what she was thinking, that each time he slew a walker, her claims were confirmed. Azor Ahai reborn, forging Lightbringer anew. But he did not feel like a prophesied hero. He felt tired, battered, and cold. If this was only the first skirmish, how would they survive the main assault when it came? And it would come, inevitably, with the weight of a legion of the dead. One White Walker or even a handful might be slain by his blade, but the rest would cut down everyone else. Even if Jon kept fighting until he collapsed, the result might be the same. Despair threatened to slip in, but he forced it down. As long as men were willing to fight, he would fight with them. He turned to Tormund, wiping away flecks of frost from his stubbled face. We fortify Eastwatch. We hold as long as we can. Send ravens back to Winterfell. Tell them we need more dragonglass. More everything. Tormund looked grimly determined. We hold until we don't. Jon nodded. Then let's make sure that doesn't happen. Prepare the men. The next attack could be at any moment. He felt the night pressing in, the storms intensifying, and a sense of finality creeping around them. Eastwatch was their bastion, the wall their last line of defense. Behind these stones, all the realms of men waited, half ignorant, half terrified. If the North had pinned its hopes on Jon Snow, Azor Ahai reborn, he could only do his best to be worthy of their faith. He remembered how the White Walker had recoiled from his sword, how, for the briefest flicker, that steel had seemed almost aflame. He remembered Bran's talk of Targaryen blood and the union of ice and fire. He had never asked for any of it, but here it was. Raising Longclaw to the gray sky, he watched the last of the walker's dust swirl away on the wind. Then he made his way down the steps, shoulders squared, mind already racing ahead. The war to save the living had truly begun. The gates of Eastwatch stood battered but unbroken, and within these walls, men of every stripe prepared to stand or fall together against the endless night. If Jon Snow had to be Azor Ahai, then so be it. He would burn as brightly as he could against the cold, until winter no longer had the strength to claim them all.